Hello everyone. Welcome to another part of What If Deku Ran an Orphanage. If you enjoy the story, please like, subscribe, and share the video. It really helps me out. I did not write the story. The original writer is Kyodon. Please go support them. Now let us dive in. Class 1A were all costumed up and ready for today's hero lesson, but when they walked into the control room, they noticed something different. Instead of All Might being here, it was Principal Nizu. Principal Nizu? Momo asked. What happened to All Might? Kaminari questioned. He is taking a break today. This lesson requires more experience and care, so I took it upon myself to be the one instructing you today. Nizu said, giving them a faintly sinister smile. Isn't that exciting? Some of the less courageous students gulped. Today's lesson will be a bit more challenging than your previous ones, Nizu warned them. How many of you have heard of OPCs? Uraraka raised her hand. I have, sir. It stands for Overly Powerful Children. It refers to children below the age of 15 with extremely powerful quirks who might be dangerous to people around them. Perfect answer, Ms. Uraraka, as expected. Nizu praised. Now, these children will pop up from time to time and prove to be hazardous in one way or another. Most of the time, these children are dealt with by the government without much of an issue. However, there are cases of OPCs accidentally or purposely going on rampages or even being used against their will as villains. Some students gasped. That's awful. Mina shouted in outrage. To think villains could sink so low. Ida commented. Seriously unmanly. Kirishima grit his sharp teeth in anger. Yes, all these incidents are extremely unfortunate, which is why you will be learning to handle them appropriately. Nizu explained, today you all will be sent into one of our fake sites where an OPC is going to be rampaging for one reason or another, and you all will have to stop them. Eh? So we're gonna have to fight a bunch of brats? Bakugo growled. No, of course not, Mr. Bakugo. In fact, if any of you even attempt to directly attack the children, then you will immediately fail the exercise, Nizu explained. You will have to find a way to stop the children without harming them. After all, true heroes do not hurt children. Many of the students nodded along with this. They all pretty much agreed that you shouldn't try to seriously fight kids, and most of them were thinking along the lines of their kids, how bad could it be? Achiko, who knew exactly how bad it could be, was sweating bullets. Oh, and to make things more interesting, we also added some fake villains into the mix, Nizu added. You mean the robots from the entrance exam? Siro asked. Nizu gave a spine-chilling laugh. No. These are much worse. Why does he have to be so scary? Mineta thought, with many of the others having similar thoughts. Now you will all be split up into teams of 4, Nizu explained. Team A will be Mineta, Bakugo, Sato, and Koda. Team B will be Todoroki, Azui, Aoyama, and Yaoyorozu. Team C will be Uraraka, Jiro, Shoji, and Shinso. Team D will be Ojiro, Kirishima, Hagakure, and Tokoyami. And lastly, Team E will consist of Ishido, Ida, Kaminari, and Siro. Now with that decided, let us begin. Later, with Team A. Team A made it into the fake city and were waiting for the exercise to start. Oh man, did you see the way Nizu was smiling? He looked like a psycho in Psycho Heaven. Mineta shouted nervously. We're doomed. Doomed. Shut up, you grape-flavored moron. Bakugo shouted at Mineta, making him go quiet in fear of the blonde's wrath. No way in hell some kid is gonna give us trouble. This crap is a waste of my time. What about the fake villains? Sato asked him. TCH, doubt there'll be any fucking challenge, Bakugo swore. This crappy exercise is gonna be easy. Roar. Suddenly a loud roar resonated through the city, grabbing the attention of all 4 heroes in training. Then, a few miles away, a giant snake-like head rose up, and then another and another. They kept rising higher and higher until eventually Kai rose up, revealed in all his glory. Roar. Kai bellowed. Is that one of the villains? Mineta asked, shaking in his boots. Roar. I am a terrifying monster. Roar. Kai said, smashing a few buildings for effect. Nah man, I think that's a kid. Sato guessed. That thing is a kid. Mineta freaked. Koda made a small squeaking noise. TCH, Bakugo growled, thinking maybe this would be a bit harder than he thought. Back in the observation room. Whoa, is that a freaking kaiju? Kaminari looked at the screen displaying Kai with wide eyes. Kai? Achiko immediately recognized the 3-headed child and was only slightly shocked to see him here. No, kaiju. You know, as in giant monsters. Kaminari corrected. No, I mean his name is Kai, Achiko explained. Is he one of Midoriya's kids? Karo. Azui asked. Midoriya, you mean like her boyfriend? Mina came in closer, not wanting to miss a single word of what could potentially be love talk. He's not my boyfriend. Achiko denied with a huge blush on her face. And yeah, he's one of Izuku's. He's a nice boy, but he can be pretty fearsome when he wants to. Wait, what did you mean by Midoriya's kids? Do you mean like his little brother or something? Toru asked curiously. Achiko wondered how best to explain it. No, he's his son. Ahoy. Most of the class responded at once, even the ones who had stayed silent like Tokoyami and Todoroki had wide eyes. Holy crap, Oka, I didn't know you were into older guys. Mina said almost immediately. Adopted. He adopted him. Achiko quickly explained. And we aren't in that kind of relationship. We will talk more about Midoriya Izuku after Team A has finished, Niza told them. Please wait until then for answers. Mina pouted. She needed more details. But it's not like she could go against Nizu, so she would have to wait. Wait a minute, Ojiro spoke up. What about the fake villains? Back to Team A. Grrrr. The four of them heard a growling behind them and turned around to see a pack of 5 Beowulfs leering at them. I think we found the villains, Sato said, somewhat intimidated by the monster's appearance. K-Day. The four looked up and saw 6 grim griffins circling them, looking like they were about to attack. Rah! They looked back in front of them and realized they were now fully surrounded, as not only had 4 more Beowulfs closed off their escape, as well as King Taijutsu and 2 Ursa. Back in the observation room. Monsters. They're monsters. Aoyama cried. Creatures of the dark, Tokoyami commented. Seriously, what are those? They like someone took all my nightmares and turned them into some kind of twisted animals. Toru shouted. The Grim, Machiko said. Does that mean Yami's here too? Yami, that was one of the boys I took to the amusement park. Ida recognized that name and remembered the young boy who had eaten enough food to feed an entire family. So these are the Grim you mentioned. I'd never seen them before, but they're just as scary as you said they were, Karo, Azui said. Wait a minute, a kid made these. Mina asked in shock. Is he okay? Does he need therapy? What kind of kid makes monsters like this? The imaginations of children can be a dark and twisted place where nightmares formed from the blackest part of the soul can emerge, Tokoyami said. Everyone was silent after that as only one word came to mind. Edgelord. Back with Team A. What the hell are these things? Mineta shouted out in fear. Kota, can you talk to these things? Sato asked. Kota shook his head fearfully. He couldn't hear anything but growls from these beasts. They weren't animals. They were horrors shaped like animals. Why talk when I can fight? Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself at the Beowulfs, Ursa, and K.T, King Taijutsu, that were between them and Kai, and unleashed a huge blast that hit all of them, blasting away the Beowulfs while the Ursa and KT moved back a bit. Get to the fucking kid. I'll take care of the monsters. Considering Bakugo's strengths and weaknesses, that actually was a really good idea. Right? Sato picked Mineta, who was paralyzed with fear. Let's go. The 3 of them ran past the Grim. To their surprise, they didn't even try to stop them, their attention purely focused on Bakugo. Thanks, Bakugo. Sato said as they sped off towards Kai. After getting some distance from the Grim, Sato asked an important question. Okay, how are we gonna do this? A few minutes later. Roar. Kai shouted as he knocked down another building. This is kind of fun. Normally I wouldn't feel such joy at knocking down buildings, stomping on cars, and uprooting trees, but this city was fake and he didn't need to worry about ruining someone's day or life. The giant boy had always needed to be so careful in his daily life, with the only exception being his mock battles with his siblings. So getting to just walk around and smash into things was strangely cathartic. But what he was really looking forward to was fighting those hero students. When Yue had approached them about being part of a training session, they had all been ecstatic. Of course, only the children who really wanted to be heroes had gone, with the exception of Yami, who had agreed to go under a certain condition. Yue drove Yami all around the city, allowing him to absorb more negativity than he had ever taken in before. They even took a trip outside Tartarus. This of course explained how Yami could produce such a huge amount of Grim. Kai kept stomping forward, leaving cracks in the streets and sidewalks below him. Then suddenly, some birds started swarming around his face. About a dozen. Birds? Kai said. And then another dozen and another and another. Suddenly it felt like hundreds of birds were now swarming, flying all over Kai's 3 heads and obscuring his vision. Ah! Kai screamed as he tried to sake them off, walking back in an attempt to escape the feathered fiends. He kept walking back and back and back, with the birds continuing to chase him. And then he suddenly could no longer lift his legs. Huh? Kai kept trying to lift his leg, and after a lot of effort he was able to get it unstuck from whatever it was stuck to, but when he put it back down again, it got stuck. Little did Kai know he had stepped over a large patch of Minetta's balls that were now stuck to his feet. While Kai was struggling to free himself, he heard someone call out to him. Hey, kid! Kai looked over to his left and saw Sato standing on a nearby building, breathing heavily after all the work it took to scale the building. Hey, kid! Could you stop? You kinda wrecking everything. Sato shouted. Kai took a moment to remember how to respond to this. Nisa had given them each different scenarios to be a part of. Like acting out a play. Oh, I can't say anything. Or he'll hurt my dad. Kai shouted, his acting terrible and hammy, but one could hardly expect anything else from a child his age. Sorry. Kai launched one of his heads at Sato, who was able to jump out of the way. The building-sized boy sent out another head, and with little time or space, Sato jumped off the building. The kid's dad is being held hostage somewhere. Find him and take out the villain. Maybe you could AH. Sato hit the ground hard, only remaining relatively unharmed thanks to his quirk. Meanwhile, with Minetta and Koda, the two were nearby, hiding from Kai next to a building. What do we do? Minetta was still panicking, but less so now. The villain could be anywhere in this huge city. How are we gonna find him? Koda stood awkwardly beside him, not sure what to do or say here. Okay, think Minoru. Think. Minetta stayed silent for a moment until his eyes opened as realization flashed in his pupils. Koda, send out your birds. Back with Bakugo. Die. Bakugo shouted as he hit another Beowulf in the chest with an explosion. The explosion went right through the Beowulf, killing it and making it dissipate. TCH. Last of the fucking wolves. Bakugo thought. The Beowulfs weren't all that tough. Sure, trying to attack their armored parts would take a bit, but their exposed sections would only take one good explosion to pierce. The only difficult part at that point would be dealing with their numbers. The Griffins had also made that pretty annoying, however, their weakness was that they were a lot less armored, so Bakugo had an easier time taking them out. Now let's get. Bakugo was hit in the back by the KT. The explosive teen and knocked flat on his face, although it didn't take him long to get back up. After picking himself up, he was immediately grabbed by the snake Grim as it wrapped its entire body around the boy, constricting him. Ah! Bakugo unleashed an explosion, hitting the snake's side and burning it slightly, but not doing enough damage to release himself. After a few attempts with still no luck at releasing himself, Bakugo could feel the air getting squeezed out of his lungs. Unable to move and running out of air, he started getting flashbacks to the slime villain. No. Not again. Bakugo started to panic. He could barely move his arms, but if he could move them just a little bit. After a bit of effort, he managed to move his arm over a tiny amount, just enough to reach the pins on his gauntlet. Kaboom! A massive explosion consumed Bakugo and the KT, obliterating the KT and sending Bakugo high into the air. Bakugo took a deep breath, relief flooded his brain as he could now finally get some air into his lungs. It took a few moments for Bakugo's brain to start functioning properly again, but when it did, he realized he was now falling quite quickly. Shit! Bakugo used his explosions to flip himself upright and start slowing his fall until he eventually brought himself safely to the ground. Fuck the goddamn snake. Bakugo cursed. Roar. Bakugo looked up at the two remaining Ursa, glaring at him, ready to attack. The spiky-haired blonde was about to taunt the monsters when suddenly, from the alleyways, 4 more Ursas and 5 more Beowulfs came in. Grr. Are those fucking extras even doing anything? Bakugo shouted in pure anger. What Bakugo didn't know was that the Grimm were attracted to negativity, which Bakugo had plenty of. Although that wasn't even the real reason Bakugo was being targeted. The real reason was that when Kyoku found out that they were going to fight Class 1A, she made sure the ones who were going knew about Bakugo and what he'd done to Izuku. Yami had given his Grimm special orders to find and hunt down Bakugo, and while he didn't want to kill him, he wouldn't mind sending him to Recovery Girl with a bit more than bruises and cuts. Speaking of targeting Bakugo. Back with Kai. Kai kept trying to free himself from the balls, but every time he raised his foot, it would just stick back to the ground every time he lowered his foot. Wait a minute. I can fly, Kai realized. Kai started flapping his wings, slowly pulling himself up. Mineta's balls tried to restrain him, keep him to the ground, but after a lot of effort, Kai managed to pull himself free and take off into the air. All right, Kai cheered at his success. So, what now? Kaboom! A massive explosion happened a few miles away from him, drawing his attention. In the distance, he could barely make it out, was Bakugo flying through the air. It's him. Kai recognized him based on Kyoku's description. Katsuki Bakugo. Kai knew what he had to do next, and he flew towards his new destination. Meanwhile, with Mineta, Koda, and Sato, the three of them were hiding next to a building when they saw Kai take off into the air. Are you kidding me? Mineta was freaking out again. Why can he fly? Well, he had wings, so I feel like we should have seen this coming. Sato pointed out. Kaboom! The three looked towards the massive explosion happening a few miles away and knew exactly what caused it. Did Bakugo use one of his gauntlets? Sato asked. He'd have to make an explosion that big. Mineta saw Kai flying towards the explosion and started panicking even more. Oh no! If he starts attacking Bakugo, it won't take long for that ticking time bomb with a short fuse to fight back. And that means we'll lose. At that moment, a pigeon flew down onto Koda's shoulder and started cooing to him. He found someone. 2 people, one of them is tied up. Koda told them. Meanwhile, with Bakugo. Rah! Bakugo roared as he turned the last Ursa to nothing. Once the Grim were dealt with, Bakugo took a moment to breathe. And then a giant shadow fell over him. Bakugo looked up and saw Kai looming over him, all 3 heads looking right at him. Hello, Kai said. Would you happen to be Katsuki Bakugo? Yeah, what about it? Bakugo snarled. Kat frowned. My name is Kai Midoriya. You bullied my father Izuku. Bakugo's eyes widened as he took in what Kai was saying, but couldn't process it. In other words, has crashed. So I need to squish you, no, Kai said as he stopped moving his wings and fell on Bakugo. Back in the observation room. Wait a minute. Mina shouted. So the kid Bakugo bullied was Achiko's boyfriend. Who's this kid's dad? He's not my boyfriend. Achiko repeated. Is that why you hate Bakugo so much, Karo? Azui asked Dokako. Achiko sighed and looked up at Kai falling onto Bakugo, bringing a smile to her face. Yeah, Izuku, a lot of bad things happened to Izuku. Bakugo was just one part of it. And that is why Bakugo Katsuki is on thin ice when it comes to the UA. Nizu added. Kirishima stayed silent. His opinion on Bakugo was hard to pin down. At first, he thought he was a really unmanly bully. An opinion which practically everyone else, especially Achiko, shared. But as time went on, he started to feel bad for him. The class had completely isolated him. At lunch, he ate alone. When they waited for the teachers to show up, no one talked to him. Even during classes when someone had to work with him, they just kinda let him do his thing. He was already being punished by the school, and it's not like he was bullying anyone anymore, and he didn't even seem that bad. If he didn't know about the bullying thing, he probably would have tried to befriend him earlier. But he didn't know how bad it was. Because he knew that some bullying wasn't that bad and some could ruin or even end some people's lives. He definitely didn't want to try and befriend him if it was on the latter end of the spectrum. Maybe, if he could talk to this Izuku guy and figure out just how bad it was, he could figure this all out. Meanwhile, in the city, Izuku was a bit anxious. Not because he was tied up on the edge of a building with President Mike, who was dressed as a villain, but because he knew damn well that Kai was confronting Bakugo. When Nizu had spoken to him about this, Bakugo had been his #1 concern. It was hard to hide things from his children considering their quirks, and he knew it wouldn't take long for Kyoku to inform the others about Bakugo, and as such, any confrontation between the children and Bakugo may very well end in death for either the child in question or Bakugo. Nizu had offered to exclude Bakugo from the exercise, but Izuku refused. He didn't want Bakugo to feel like an outcast or that he was being targeted. Instead, Izuku and Nizu had organized the teams and who would be fighting who. Izuku had decided that out of all the children, Kai would be the best one to fight Bakugo. Kiba, Sanson, and Netsu might kill him. And Fu now had a fire weakness, so putting him up against Bakugo was a risk he didn't want to take. Kai was a gentle child, and while Izuku couldn't see any of his children purposely killing anyone, if they were to go into a rage, there is a chance they could lose control and kill him. He couldn't really imagine Kai losing control like that, so he was the best choice. That didn't mean that he wasn't nervous though. Haha. Yes, my monster. Destroy everything. Ha ha. Present Mike shouted, acting the part of the villain the best way he knew how. With lots and lots of ham. Izuku was about to point out that no one was here to hear his acting when the door to the roof suddenly swung open and Sato emerged. It's over, V-Mike-sensei? Sato asked. Present Mike pulled out a gun and aimed it at Sato. No. I am the villain. Sick beats. There were a few moments of silence. Really? Sick beats? Sato asked, giving him an "are you serious" look. Yes, because I'm sick and I've got beats. Present Mike said. Sick beats. Another moment of silence until Sato sighed. Just get him, Mineta. Huh? Ah. Suddenly, from the side of the building, Minta popped up and grabbed onto Mick's face. Mineta had been climbing the building using his balls while Sato used the door to distract him. Ah. How dare you make us fight a kaiju and an army of demons? You almost gave me a heart attack. Mineta shouted as he pulled at Mick's face. Get off. Mike dropped the gun from shock and tried to pull Mineta off his face. Then Mike felt Sato's arms wrap around his waist and Mineta jumped off of him, allowing Sato to safely suplex his teacher. Ah, was that really necessary? Mike groaned as he allowed himself to go limp. The villains defeated. Sato looked at Izuku. Are you supposed to be this kid's dad? Before Izuku could respond, Mineta spoke first, obviously not. He's probably just some Gen Ed kid that UA's using to act as a fake dad. Actually Kai is my son. My real son? Izuku corrected. The two looked at him with shock in their eyes and Mineta's jaw was hanging down to his knees. Hui. Izuku sighed. It's a long story. For now, let's just get me to Kai. Back in the observation room. Hui. Shouted most of the class. He looks like he's the same age as us. Toru pointed out. He is, Sachiko confirmed. He's a teen dad. Kaminari asked. All will be explained later, Niza told them. Meanwhile, with Kai and Bakugo. Bakugo was in shock. Part of it was the fact that he was being crushed by a 40-foot child and now had multiple broken bones and probably some other injuries. A larger part of it was that this kid just said he was Deka's son. Now that was impossible for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, who the fuck would want to have sex with Deku? Secondly, this kid was, well, honestly Bakugo couldn't tell given the giant monster thing, but he was talking so he had to be at least like 5 or 4 or something, which, unless Deka had been hiding this from him somehow for the past few years, should be impossible. Thirdly, who the hell did quirkless Deka have a kid this big? Kai got off of Bakugo looking down at the now very injured boy who was still in a state of shock. Did I overdo it? Did I not do it enough? Kai wondered. Hello? Are you thoroughly injured? Have you learned your lesson yet? Bakugo was still too shocked to do anything. Before Kai could ask again, he heard someone shout his name. Kai! Dad? Kai turned around and saw Izuku standing on the streets, looking up at him. You're free. Is the exercise over? Yes, it is, Izuku said. He looked at Bakugo in the crater Kai had made and winced at how much that must have hurt. And not a moment too soon, Izuku said. Later, in the observation room. Team A had returned to the observation room with Izuku in tow. Bakugo, on the other hand, was taken to the medical wing to be treated, which was a good thing because by now he had gone from shock to anger and confusion. So, I believe now it's time for explanations, Niza said before gesturing towards Izuku. This is Izuku Midoriya, head of, what do you call your organization again? Well, I don't really consider it an organization, it's more a family. Izuku nervously tried very hard not to look at Class 1A who were all staring at him. Head of the Midoriya family, Niza said. You see, when the parent of an OP-C can no longer take care of their child or simply gives up on their child, they temporarily go into the care of DOC, an organization that is part of the government that is in charge of finding and containing OP-Cs until they deem them fit to be moved into the more permanent care of Mr. Midoriya, who then becomes their legal guardian and is responsible for them until they are of age. Mina was sputtering in confusion. Why the hell would they give this job to someone our age? Jiro asked what everyone, save a few, were thinking. That does sound terribly irresponsible, Momo added. Well, there is a simple answer to that question. It's because no one else wants Mr. Midoriya's job, Nizu explained. Before they made this agreement with Mr. Midoriya, they had offered the O.P.Cs up for adoption. However, this had many problems. Most people didn't want to adopt children who had a high chance of accidentally killing them, and the few that did want to take that risk were mostly only doing it for the financial benefit and didn't actually take care of the children. As you can imagine, both of these outcomes caused feelings of resentment and anger to grow in these children, and an unfortunate amount of them became villains, and as you can imagine with their quirks, caused quite a large amount of death and destruction. Of course, there were some exceptions, but those people would often only take in one child or perhaps two. Mr. Midoriya is the only one willing to risk his life taking care of a large number of dangerous children and also actually care about them and show them an adequate amount of affection. There was a long pause as the information sunk in. Many students took it differently. Shinso fully sympathized with those kids. After all, he knew how having a dangerous or even unsightly quirk could seriously affect a person's life and seriously respected Izuku for taking care of them, even if he didn't think it was a necessarily smart thing to do. Momo was wondering how so many parents could be so cruel as to give up their children just because of their quirks, and how the nation could be so uncaring and self-centered that the only person they could find to take all these kids was another child. She was also wondering how exactly the government let a 15-year-old do this in the first place. Todoroki didn't quite know how to feel about Midoriya himself. On one hand, he respected his desire to give these kids a happy childhood because God knows he wished he'd had one, but on the other hand, he wondered why he would ever do something so dangerous and that ate up so much of his life. Kirishima. That's so manly, the red-haired hero student shouted, being the first to speak out of all of them. Ha! Izuku was taken aback by this positive response, still not quite used to receiving genuine praise from anyone above the age of 10. I mean, maybe you should have waited a bit, but what you're doing is super manly. Kirishima praised. Parenting by itself is manly, but you're taking in dangerous kids even if it could kill you. That's like being a hero. Hey! Izuku definitely wasn't ready for that. I agree 100%. Achiko jumped him, giving Izuku a bright smile. Of course you would. Mina teased, making Achiko blush, and shot the pink girl an irritated look. But seriously, that's super cool of you. Respect. I suppose it is rather commendable to help these children the way you do. Momo still wasn't really sure about this whole thing, but she did at least respect Izuku's desire to help these children at the very least. Izuku's face was bright red and was rendered totally speechless. Mr. Midoriya is quite socially awkward, so don't mind if he acts a little strange, Niza told them. Izuku covered his face as he became super overwhelmed. Now with that explained, shall we go on to our next match with one of Mr. Midoriya's children? Niza smiled. Team B, that being Todoroki, Azui, Aoyama, and Momo, stood in the fake city waiting anxiously for the exercise to start. Well, except Todoroki, who didn't seem to be nervous at all. You're rather calm, Todoroki. Azui pointed out. Aren't you at least a bit nervous about what they could throw at us after seeing the first round, Karo? My ice can deal with whatever they throw at us, Todoroki said confidently, yet still using his typically icy tone. You've met Midoriya and his children before, haven't you? Do you know what they might throw at us? Azui shook her head. I haven't seen Midoriya in a while, and thanks to his deal with DOC he's probably gotten quite a few new kids in the meanwhile. And even if he didn't, I wouldn't know which one of the kids I saw they could send at us. Todoroki didn't respond. Even with your incredible quirk, I don't think we can rely on that alone, Momo spoke up. After all, we can't harm the child in any way, so I'm not sure we can rely on power alone to secure victory. My ice can also be a good tool to capture and immobilized, Shoto responded. Unless the kid has some insanely powerful fire quirk, then we should be fine. But I think you were forgetting something, Aoyama said. Whoosh! Suddenly, from a few miles away, a massive pillar of flames erupted, piercing the sky with fire. It was so powerful it even caused the ground to shake slightly. Niza is a sadist. Aoyama finished. TCH. Todoroki grits his teeth. Let's go. Back in the observation room, the class watched as Netsu was revealed on screen in all his flaming glory. He's new, right? I've never seen him before. Achiko pointed out. Ah yes, Netsu came in the last batch of children. He has a really powerful fire quirk that's really hard to control. He can already reach temperatures that rival Endeavor's without even using any of the techniques Endeavor uses to increase his fire's heat. Izuku revealed, causing some of the class to balk in awe. That's insane! Mineta shouted out in fear. Although I suppose it should be expected for someone who comes from a home for overly dangerous children. Tokoyami pointed out. Yeah, no kidding. Mina agreed. Back in the city. Burn! Netsa shouted as he incinerated 5 beowulfs in a wave of fire. Yeah. Netsa knew today was gonna be fun. Being part of an exercise at UA already sounded fun, but then he was told exactly what his role was. His role being use as much excessive force as possible and incinerate anything that moved while Grim came at him in massive numbers. And so he flew around burning away any Grim he found. Until he stumbled upon Team B running towards him. Alright, let's see how strong UA students are. Without any explanation, Netsa brought his hand together and unleashed a fireball the size of a car at the 4 of them. While Azui, Momo, and Aoyama froze in fear, Todoroki froze the area in front of them, creating a massive icy wall that blocked the fireball and caused steam to cover the ground. Hey, I can't see. Netsa complained before remembering his lines. You won't hurt me, villains. You and your monsters won't beat my fire. Netsa started throwing fireballs wildly in every direction, absolutely destroying the environment around them. Todoroki kept up his ice wall, having to constantly reinforce it to keep up with the insanely hot flames. It was a mistake to underestimate them. Todoroki grit his teeth as the constant shift between cold and hot made his head spin. We can't even get close. Momo said. I told you OCPs live up to their names, Azui said, keeping her distance from the ice. Yes, but it appears we have other problems, Aoyama said, looking up. The other 2 turned around while Todoroki kept his focus on keeping the fire at bay. They looked up behind them and all of them froze at what they saw. Roar! In the sky was a massive, grim dragon. Back in the observation room. Is that a fucking dragon? Kaminari asked as everyone looked to the screen in awe. So he actually made it. Izuka stared at the beast his son had created. It was about half the size of Kai, maybe a bit more, and looked absolutely terrifying. This is Yami's quirk? Ida was in shock. He remembered the little boy he escorted through the amusement park and couldn't imagine that such a small boy could make something like this. Yeah, he showed me design like this before as a drawing. He said it took way too much negative energy to create. Izuku explained. Negative energy? Shoji asked. Yami's quirk allows him to absorb people's negative emotions and turn it into some kind of energy that he can then turn into the Grim. Izuka clarified. So in short, he can turn people's inner demons into outer demons. Tokoyami summarized. Basically, Izuku confirmed. That's crazy. He could build a huge army of monsters and attack a city. And then all the anger and sadness and fear would let him make more and more. He could take over the world. Mineta shouted, over-exaggerating. I don't like to think about it that way, and I don't think he could do all that. He could certainly cause quite a bit of destruction, Izuku admitted, seeming almost pained to do so. Wait, is that thing making more grim? Mina asked as she pointed at the screen. Back with Team B. Team B watched in horror as the dragon's back bubbled and sludge fell off the dragon onto the ground. The sludge changed shape until it had turned into 2 grim griffins. Okay, that is ridiculous. Azui knew that Niza was a sadist, everyone did, but how did he expect them to actually beat this thing? The griffins came at them and the students had to be ready for it. Aoyama shot his laser at one of the griffins' heads, disorienting it, allowed Azui to jump up and wrap her tongue around it and slam it into the other griffin. Momo made a cannon and blasted both Grim, destroying them. We need to figure out how we're gonna take out the dragon, Momo shouted to her teammates. Then the dragon itself came down at them with its giant maw open. But before it could reach them, it was hit in the face by a powerful flamethrower attack from Netsu, who had flown around the ice to attack the dragon. Rah! The dragon flew away from Netsu's attack, higher into the sky, coming away from it with some burn marks and slight melting on his mask. Netsu followed the dragon up into the sky, leaving the hero students behind. We have to help him. If we help him against the dragon, then we can convince him that we're not villains, at least in the context of the test. Momo reasoned. Rag. More Grim came charging at the students, mostly Beowulfs followed by some Ursa. Todoroki, you and Aoyama should focus on the dragon and the child. Azui and I will take care of the monsters down here, Momo said, creating a spear. Right? Todoroki grabbed Aoyama and created a pillar of ice under them that rose them higher and higher into the sky. When they finally reached the dragon, Netsu was chasing it, flying in a very sloppy fashion while shooting fireballs everywhere. Todoroki made another ice wall to block a stray fireball, and from behind them one of the griffins flew at them. I don't think so, Monstra. Aoyama unleashed the most powerful naval blast he could right at the griffin, destroying its head and killing it. I'll focus on the dragon, keep those griffins off me, Todoroki ordered. Aoyama dreaded how his stomach would feel when this was all over. Todoroki tried to make a trail of ice leading to the dragon, but Netsu's fireballs kept destroying it. I can't afford to hold back, Todoroki thought. If he was gonna fight this thing while Netsu was around, then he would have to use the full capability of his mother's quirk. And so while Aoyama shot the griffins out of the air, Todoroki waited patiently for the dragon to get closer. Netsu chased the dragon around with its flamethrower until eventually the dragon flew only a few feet away from Todoroki. In an instant, Todoroki made a massive iceberg that completely swallowed the dragon. Whoa! Netsu stopped for a moment, surprised by the sudden appearance of the iceberg. Crack! However, the iceberg wouldn't stay there for long, as the bridge Todoroki had made was too small to hold the weight of the massive iceberg, and it was about to collapse. Todoroki ran back to the ice platform with Aoyama following. He could feel the frostbite nipping at his fingers and at his sides, but he had more important things to worry about. Because the iceberg was above Azui and Momo. Azui Yaoyorozu, move! Todoroki shouted into his earpiece. Crack! The ice broke and the iceberg went hurtling downwards. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Azui drop-kicked an Ursa to death and Momo was impaling a Beowulf when they heard Todoroki's warning. There's an iceberg about to crash on you too. Move! Todoroki told them through the earpiece. Momo and Azui could quickly see the shadow of the iceberg getting bigger and bigger very quickly as it approached them at an alarming rate. Azui acted quickly and grabbed Momo with her tongue and made broad leaps away from where they were. Crash! The iceberg hit the ground only a little less than a dozen feet from where the two girls were. The impact broke the ice apart into hundreds of thousands of little pieces that flew through the air like pieces of shrapnel. Momo made a shield and blocked the ice shards, protecting both her and Azui from harm. When all was said and done, all that was left of the iceberg were chunks of ice and a cool mist that covered the ground. Did that do it? Momo asked hopefully. A few moments later, her question was answered when a giant black figure emerged from the mist. Roar! The dragon rose up from the mist, towering over the two girls. It was damaged, with some burn marks and melted parts from Netsu's attacks, as well as cracks in its armor and cuts in its skin from being trapped in the ice and falling to the ground. The worst of its injuries were its wings. Now cut up and filled with holes, they would no longer be suited for flight. Momo stepped back from the intimating beast, but as she did so she noticed that Azui was not doing the same, instead seeming groggy. All the frosty mist was making the frog girl very sleepy, and she was doing her best to keep from falling asleep, but she was very out of it. The dragon seemed to notice this and charged at her, opening its massive maw to swallow her whole. Momo jumped at her classmate, moving her out of the way just in time for the dragon to miss her. The dragon turned its head towards the two downed girls and let out another fearsome roar. With the monster upon them and with Azui completely out of it and on the ground, Momo knew she couldn't dodge anymore and had to come up with another strategy. She quickly made a flare gun and shot it right in the dragon's face. Rah! The flare exploded in the dragon's eyes, not doing any damage but causing it close its eyes and flail its head around wildly as it stumbled backward. Momo kept shot it in the face 2 more times, causing it to keep stumbling back. Unfortunately, Momo had run out of flares. She lifted up Azui and hoped to get away from the dragon while it was still stunned, but the dragon recovered before she got far. With its jaw open, it rushed at the two. And then a massive chunk of ice fell on its head. Todoroki! Momo shouted. The half-and-half teen himself came down with Aoyama on an ice slide and the two of them ran over to their teammates. We are glad to see you two were not crushed, Aoyama told them. I apologize, I should have known the ice would fall, Todoroki said before he noticed the now unconscious Azui. Is she injured? No, it seems like all this cold sent her into some sort of hibernation. She most likely won't wake up until we get her somewhere warmer. Roar! The dragon still wasn't done and rose up once more. The armor on its head was now heavily damaged, looking like it was about to fall apart. Just stay down. Todoroki shivered from the ice crawling up his right side but released another wave of ice at the creature regardless. The ice covered the dragon once more, however this time the ice was weaker due to Todoroki overusing his quirk and the dragon quickly started breaking through. Momo saw that Todoroki was about to unleash another attack and stopped him by putting her hand out in front of him. "You're shivering, we should retreat." "I'm fine," Todoroki insisted. "I know now may not be the best time to bring this up, but where's the boy?" Aoyama asked. Flum. Suddenly from the sky, a giant wall of flames slammed into the dragon so hard it knocked all 3 students off their feet and blew them away. Todoroki made some ice to stop them from getting blown away any further and an ice wall in front of them to protect them from the heat. Aghai! Todoroki struggled to maintain all the ice the heat poured through, curing his frostbite but also making them all sweat intensely. Aoyama even passed out from the heat due to the fact he was in a suit of armor that only made the problem worse. They couldn't even look directly at the fire because it was so bright it would have blinded them. This went on for half a minute until the flames died out. Where the dragon once was now nothing but scorched earth and black smoke. Todoroki and Momo, after taking a few moments to get their bearings, got up and picked up their unconscious classmates. Is it over?" Momo asked. Back in the observation room. "Holy shit," Kaminari said in awe. "That could just nuke the dragon." Jiro gaped, sharing her classmates' sense of awe. "I told you Netsu's quirk was powerful, although this is the first time I've seen him use an attack like this." Izuku was also surprised, but to a much lesser extent. Is he going to be alright? Surely an attack of this level must have some toll on his body? Ida asked, concerned for the boy's well-being. Izuku shook his head. Netsu's quirk has very little direct drawbacks. It's very hard for him to control and can cause a lot of property damage, but the only negative effects it can have on himself is if he breathes in the smoke or if he's in a confined space and burns up all his oxygen. But in wide open spaces like this, he's pretty much fine so long as he's careful, although the lack of control over his quirk can make his ability to fly pretty sloppy and can cause him to dash. On screen, the students saw Netsu try to land only to smack into the ground face first. "Crash, can we please get him to Recovery Girl as soon as possible?" Izuku said with concern. "Of course." Nisa leaned over to the microphone. "Will some medical bots please take Netsu, Midoriya, Azui, and Oyama to Recovery Girl, and will Mr. Todoroki and Ms. Yayarosa come back to the observation room?" After a few minutes, Netsu, Aoyama, and Azui had all been carted off to Recovery Girl. Azui was just asleep and relatively unharmed. Netsu broke his nose and was healed with Recovery Girl's quirk and was now taking a nap. And Aoyama had been overheated, so he was taken out of his armor and treated. The rest of the class, minus Bakugo, who was also still with Recovery Girl, was in the observation room. "Alright, while you did technically pass the test, if this was a real situation, you too would have failed," Nisa told them, much to the 2 students' shock. "If you were paying attention, you'll notice the Grimm made no attempt to attack Netsu. This was because obviously we didn't want the young man to be harmed, but if this was a real situation, the villain would have obviously fought back. You allowed the child to fight the villain by himself for far too long." A moment that comes to mind is when Mr. Todoroki allowed the child to lure the dragon close to him, rather than attempting to lure him close or attack with his own flames. Todoroki flinched but didn't respond. That's of course not even mentioning all the property damage and the fact that dropping an iceberg from that height would most likely harm if not kill civilians or allies. Nisa continued. "The only reason I am no failing you all is because of the difficulty of the test. We understand, we will perform better next time, Principal Nizu," Momo said with an embarrassed bow. Todoroki did not respond. What's going on with him? Izuku wondered. He didn't use his fire at all during that test. I wonder why? Now with that done, let us move on to the next test. Nisa looked at Team C, who by now we're very, very nervous. As they should be. Now, before you start, this match will have a special change in rules. Nisa told them, looking at Team C, for this match, you are able to attack the children, but you are not allowed to harm them. The entire class looked at the principal in confusion. Am I stupid, or isn't that the same thing? Kaminari asked. You are stupid, but yeah, it does sound like the same thing, Jiro said. I'm afraid I don't understand, sir. What do you mean by this? Ida asked his principal politely. That you will have to figure out on your own, Nisa said with a small sadistic laugh. Welp, we're fucked. Shinso thought. Izuku looked at Uraraka, who was deep in thought. I wonder if she figured it out? A bit later in the fake city. Team C had been walking through the city for a few minutes and still had yet to see the child, which was weird considering that from what they'd seen these kids weren't exactly hard to find. But despite this, Jiro looked extremely nervous. "Jiro, what's wrong?" Shoji asked her using one of his arm's mouths. "I can't hear them," Jiro revealed. "You can't hear what?" Shinso asked her. "Those monsters. Shouldn't there be a ton of them around us or at least a few miles away, but I don't hear anything. It's completely silent," Jiro said, thoroughly unnerved. "Maybe they are waiting for the child?" Shoji theorized before looking at Uraraka. "Uraraka, do you know who the child we're facing might be?" Everyone looked at Uraraka and the ninth wielder paused as she considered what she was about to say. "Well, I think I might know, but I'm not sure." "It's better than nothing," Shinso told her. "At least we might have an idea what we're going up against." When the principal said that we can't harm them but we can attack them, maybe he meant that even if we attack them, harming them won't be that easy. Achiko speculated. Two of the kids had quirks that made them almost impossible to hurt them. Fu and Sanson. "What do you mean, impossible to hurt them?" Jiro asked, her eyes widened with alarm at the thought of facing an invisible enemy. "Not impossible, just really, really hard," said a voice behind them. The three of them immediately turned around and saw Fu standing there with his typical blank expression. "Fu, it is you," Achiko said with a bright expression on her face and relief filling her voice. "Hi, Uraraka. It's nice to see you," Fu greeted in his usual monotone. "It's been a while." Back in the observation room. "Wait a minute, I know him," Mina shouted out, pointing at Fu on the screen. "Why you do?" Izuku asked, looking at the pinkette in confusion. "Yeah, I saw him in Kiba's videos," Toru exclaimed excitedly. "Wait a minute. Are you Kiba's dad? Is someone gonna fight Kiba?" "Well, yes, and kind of. She's here and she will be part of the exercise, but you can't really fight her because, well, you can't attack her," Izuku explained nervously. "That's amazing." Mina and Toru had stars in their eyes, excited at the prospect of meeting their favorite online celebrity. "Wait, if you watch Kiba's videos, then why didn't you recognize any of the other kids?" "They're in her videos too," Izuku asked. "Oh, we only just found out about her. We watched a few videos but we didn't see anyone but her," Fu, Toru explained. "But I can't wait to watch the rest." "So have you seen Fu and Kiba's quirks?" Izuku asked hopefully. "Nope, I've only watched her gaming stream," Toru revealed. "I saw Kiba's quirk but not Fu's," Mina admitted. "She has a dash." "Please do not tell the class about her quirk. I would like to keep it a surprise if possible," Niza told her. "Sadist," went through the minds of most of the students after hearing that. Izuku just sighed in disappointment. He had hoped that at least one person would have seen Fu's quirk, because he was well aware of how grotesque Fu's quirk could be and it tended to make things complicated. It was one of the reasons that Kiba's channel was often described as Gapmo. On one hand, you had Kiba's adorableness and super endearing personality, then on the other hand you'd see her rip Fu's head off and a fountain of blood burst from his neck stump. It put a lot of people off. They've been really nice so far, so hopefully nothing goes wrong. Izuku crossed his fingers. "Back with Team C. You haven't visited in a while," Fu pointed out, still talking to Uraraka. Hee, yeah, I've been really busy. Aizawa-sensei gave us so much work," Uraraka sheepishly complained. "You should come over, dads, let's talk about that later." Fu realized that this wasn't the time or place to be talking about this. Ehem. "Surrender, heroes. You're surrounded." The team looked around and saw nothing. "Do you know what the word surrounded means?" Shinso asked the child. "Yup," Fu answered. "We do." And then Jiro's eyes widened. "Guys, I hear something. Below us." Then the ground started to shake. And that's when the Grimm suddenly burst from the ground underneath them, surrounding the team completely. There were 3 kinds of creatures, all brand new to the teens. One of them looked like a giant centipede that towered over them, even with some of its body still underground. Parts of its body would rotate in a complete circle, suggesting a less than simple anatomy. There were some small creates that didn't look like any animal they'd ever seen before. The best one could describe it as if an alligator wore armor and instead of having 4 legs on the top and bottom parts of its body, just had 2 big legs in the middle like a T-Rex without arms. And the last one was just a giant worm the size of a very small building with a huge gaping spiked maw. All in all, there were 5 centipedes, 12 of the small creepy things, and 1 massive worm. "Oh, they can go underground," Of course, they can. Shinso growled. Focus on the girl with the purple hair, Fu ordered. Ha! Jiro yelled in shock and horror. Why me? Rah! The creatures closed in and went to attack them. Jiro plugged her earlobes into her boots and blasted the Grim in her direction with a wave of sound. The creeps were blown back by the wave. The centipedes were stunned for a moment but didn't seem too affected. A centipede and 2 creeps charged at Jiro from behind, intent on attacking her. Shinso went forward and threw his capture tool around the 2 creeps and slammed them into the centipede's moving blades where they were then eviscerated. Achiko jumped at the centipede head and touched it using her new ability to increase gravity to cause the beast to crash onto the ground. Meteor kick. Uraraka charged up to 7% of 1 for all and came down on the centipede with an axe kick to the skull, crashing through the bone and into the soft black parts. As the Grim faded away, 6 creeps ran at Jiro, 3 on both sides of her. Shoji charged in and knocked the 3 creeps away on her left, while Jiro blasted the 3 on her right with a sound wave. Why is he after me? Jiro shouted at Achiko as the whole team grouped up. I don't know. It doesn't make any wo. Suddenly Achiko was grabbed by the leg by a large black tendril and dragged away from her teammates. This tendril came, not from the Grim, but from Fu himself, his arm being completely covered in the inky black substance. Fu brought Achiko in front of him, holding upside down in front of his face. We haven't seen each other in a while, so allow me to induce Kyosei. Say hi. Suddenly the inky blackness overtook Fu's face and replaced it with a pure black one with white eyes and sharp teeth. Rah! Wahi! Achiko was thrown away from the rest of her team by Fu's tentacle. Fu's body was then covered by Kyosei until the boy underneath could no longer be seen, and then he charged after Achiko, running on all 4s like an animal. Just when I thought he was a normal-looking kid, Shinso remarked. Back in the observation room. So is that his quirk? Shiro asked Izuku. No, the black inky stuff is actually another one of my kids, Izuku revealed. Wait, what? Shouted a good chunk of the class. That black goop is a kid? Kaminari's jaw was hanging. Yes, his name is Kyosei, and please don't call him Black Goop. Izuku sighed. He didn't blame him for calling Kyosei that. It wasn't the most flattering thing to call a child, but it wasn't inaccurate. Kyosei's quirk is called symbiote. His body is composed entirely of this black liquidy substance, which allows him to enter into people's bodies and form a bond with them, turning them into a host. This host will gain numerous physical advantages such as enhanced strength, speed, durability, etc., as well as the ability to use Kyosei's body itself as a weapon. Nizu explained, looking at the amazed faces of his students. However, this comes at a cost. While bonded, Kyosei will begin to feed one's internal organs until the host has died. It will also cause the host's emotions to become overwhelming to the point where the host no longer knows how to handle them, which in theory would often resolve in the host going insane until they die. The looks of amazement that had been on the students' faces when they heard of Kyosei's benefits turned to horror and shock when they heard of the price. Wait. Then why does that kid have him? Sato was the first to ask the question that was now on everyone's minds. Well, I assume this Fu has a quirk that would negate the drawbacks of bonding with Kyosei. Alright. Momo asked, hoping she was correct. Very astute of you. Young Fu's quirk makes him, well, immortal may not be the right word, it's rather complicated to explain, so let's just say it makes him an unkillable zombie, which is an oxymoron, but that is the best way to explain it, Niza said. So long as he consumes enough meat, he will be able to regenerate from any and all injuries. He is unable to physically feel anything, and his emotions, while he still has them, are muted to a degree. So he's the perfect host, Tokoyami concluded. The class calmed down. For the most part, some of them were still a bit squeamish about the thought of someone's organs getting eaten. Why not just not give Kyosei a host? Mina asked. I doubt it would be that simple, Todoroki responded. He said that Kyosei feeds on the organs through the bonding process, implying that he needs to bond in order to survive. Very good, Mr. Todoroki. You are absolutely correct. Niza happily praised his student. Without a host, Kyosei will die. Meaning that there was no other option than to find someone like Fu. There was a moment of silence as the class had to let that information sink in. Back with Team C minus Achiko. The 3 remaining members of the team did their best to hold off the attacking Grimm, but without Achiko there wasn't much damage they could do to them. The creeps weren't that bad to deal with, but the centipedes with their spinning blades were completely unapproachable by the students, and all they could do was avoid them. And then there was the worm. The worm was far too tough for them to hurt, and its ability to dive underground served to make fighting it an even more futile effort. Thankfully, Shoji and Jiro were able to detect any underground attacks, but avoiding them proved to be easier said than done. "This is pointless," Shinso said as he slammed a creep into a centipede's head using his capture tool. "We can't beat these things without Uraraka. We need to regroup with her." "How though?" Jiro asked as she ran away from a centipede. "There's too many of them. And they're underground. Any time we try to get away, that worm will just pop up and stop us," Shoji said as he gave a 3-armed backhand to a creep. "Well, if they're underground, then we need to get into the air." Shinso looked up at the nearby buildings. "We need to get to the rooftops." "Great idea. How?" Jiro asked. Shinso threw his capture tool around the waist of both his teammates. "You have to push us up there with your quirk. Or at least far enough for me to get us up there." Jiro looked up at the closest building and then back at her 2 teammates. If she could blast them up far enough into the air with her speakers, then Shinso could use his capture tool to swing them over to a rooftop and hopefully out of the reach of the Grimm. But that was a big if. "At least my heart is pounding," Jiro thought. She didn't have much time though, as the Grimm started encroaching on them once more. Jiro couched down and faced her, speakers towards the floor. "You know if this doesn't work we're fucked, right?" "Well, if we stay here we're pretty fucked too, so less sass and more sound waves," Shinso told her. Jiro held her breath. Boom. She let off the biggest sound wave she'd ever let off, and it launched them into the air, with Shinso's capture tool keeping them together. And they made it. 2/3 of the way up. They made it 2/3 of the way up the side of the building. Fortunately, they had made it just far enough for Shinso to throw his capture tool around a railing on one of the rooftops. The 3 of them swung to the side of the building, and were now out of reach of the creeps and centipedes. "Oh God, I can't believe that worked." Jiro released the breath she was holding as she hung by Shinso's capture tool along with her other 2 teammates. "Looks like we're out of the danger zone for now," Shinso said. Jiro's eyes suddenly widened as she heard something that gave her chills. "I wouldn't say that. It's the worm. It's coming up and fast. It might be trying to jump." "Shit." Shinso knew what he needed to do. He grabbed his capture tool and tried to climb up the side of the building. However, with both Shoji and Jiro weighing him down, he wasn't making much progress. Shoji saw this and reacted accordingly, grabbing both Shinso and Jiro and taking hold of the capture tool and climbing up much faster. A few seconds later, they had made it most of the way there. And then, Raha! The worm burst from the ground, leaping into the air. The 3 teens froze in terror as they saw its spiky mug getting closer and closer way too quickly. Fortunately, though, the worm stopped a few feet away from them as gravity finally took effect and forced the worm back to the ground. The teens were flooded with an intense sense of relief, knowing they were finally out of danger, for now. Shoji pulled them to the rooftop and Shinso unwrapped his capture tool off of them. "All right, now let's go find Uraraka," Shinso said. "Can you 2 locate her?" They both nodded and Shoji made some extra ears while Jiro started moving her earjacks around. Meanwhile, at the fake park with Achiko. Crash. Uraraka was thrown through a tree by one of Fu's tendrils. She rolled across the dirt until she stopped when her body smashed into a rock. "Ah! Eh!" Achiko grunted in pain as she slowly tried to pull herself off the ground. Fu dashed a few feet away from her, giving his opponent a menacing leer. "Wow, Fu, you really got a lot stronger since we fought last time." Achiko felt a strange feeling while fighting Fu and Kyosei. She'd kind of felt bad for him before. The boy was the only one in the group of kids that wanted to be heroes that didn't have a super offensive quirk. Heck, technically speaking, his quirk wasn't good for defense either, since regeneration didn't defend you, rather it just kept you from dying. The poor boy would get tossed around and dismembered and beheaded and even used as a weapon by Kiba a few times. But with Kyosei, Fu was now a significant threat and Achiko felt kinda proud. Even if he was kicking her ass. "Thanks. We may not be as strong, Kiba, but we have a few tricks up our sleeve." Fu raised his arm and it shapeshifted into a hammer. "Sanson taught us this one." Fu raised his hammer arm up, stitching it high into the sky before bringing it down on Achiko. Achiko quickly dashed out of the way as the hammer slammed down onto where she had been standing, breaking the ground it smashed into. Uraraka changed at Fu, with one for all speeding her up. She didn't get too close, however, as 5 tentacles grew out of Fu's back and flew at Achiko. Achiko had to suddenly stop and then move back as she jumped out of the way of various tentacle swipes. As one of the tentacles jabbed at her, she dodged it and grabbed onto the tentacle, intent on making Fu heavier. But before she could get all 5 fingers on it, the tentacle shifted around in her hand, covering it and keeping all her fingers separated so her quirk wouldn't activate. Did you think we didn't think about how to deal with that? Fu told her. Kyosei's black goo spread from Achiko's hand onto her arm. Achiko struggled to try and escape Kyosei's grip, but even using 7% of one for all didn't help her. More tentacles wrapped around Achiko's body, trapping her in a cocoon of black. This is my win, Uraraka. Fu raised Achiko high in the air. Uraraka. Fu paused and turned to look behind him and saw Shinso, Shoji, and Jiro running towards him. So you escaped the Grim. Fu shot out more tendrils from his back at the 3 students. All 3 of them managed to jump out of the way but had to keep running as the tendrils kept chasing them. How long are these things? Shinso shouted as he kept running. Why don't you use your quirk to stop him? Jiro asked her fellow purple-haired classmate. I tried. It didn't work. Shinso told her. Right? Most of Fu's brain functions are dead. So Shinso's quirk doesn't work on him. Achiko thought as she kept struggling inside of Fu's cocoon. And then, much to her surprise, she managed to move her hands around and touch the cocoon with her fingers. Ha! Suddenly all of Fu's tentacles smashed into the ground, as did his body, as gravity suddenly tripled on him. Achiko's cocoon smashed into the ground and was reduced to goo by the impact, freeing her from its hold. What happened? Did he get distracted and lose focus? Achiko speculated while she quickly pulled herself out of the goop. Uraraka. Achiko looked up and saw her team running towards her. Guys. Uraraka met them halfway, finally reuniting with her teammates. How'd you get away from all the Grim? We used the rooftops. All the Grim moved primarily underground so they couldn't follow us once we got up there. Shoji explained. Nice. Achiko praised, giving her team the thumbs up. But what's so do now? Unlike the other 2, this one seemed to be leading the attack, so we may have to force him to surrender without hurting him. Shoji theorized. I think since this is an exercise, just threatening to hurt him would make him surrender, given that most children would give up under threat of harm. That's not possible. Fu can't be harmed or even feel pain. His quirk makes it impossible. Achiko explained. Well, it doesn't seem like he can do anything now that you've increased his gravity, Shinso noted. I wouldn't be so sure. The 4 of them looked at Fu, who had retracted his tentacles into themselves and pulled himself off the ground using sheer strength to resist the increased gravity. He's a lot stronger than he looks. Achiko told them as they got ready to defend themselves. And faster to, so be careful dash. Before she could finish what she was saying, Fu lunged at Jiro, tackling her to the ground. Ah! Why are you going after me? Jiro tried to pull Fu off her, but this was to no avail as the increased gravity made Fu heavier and harder to pull off. Fu raised his fist to punch Jiro in the face, and that's when Jiro raised her earlobes in defense. Raha! Kyosei roared out in panic, and Fu jumped off of Jiro as quickly as he could and continued to back away from her. Huh? Jiro paused in confusion. What just happened? Shinso asked in equal befuddlement. He seemed frightened of Jiro's earlobes. Shoji pointed out. Come to think of it, when he sent the Grim after us, he focused on Jiro. But if he can't be harmed, so what's he afraid of? Shinso turned to Achiko for answers. I don't know. Izuka never mentioned a weakness to sound, unless Fu isn't weak to sound, but Kyosei is. Achiko realized. Fu lunged at Achiko, but the girl jumped back to dodge it. Can you guys pin him? Jiro asked her teammates. Uraraka, can't you increase his gravity more? It's tied to how much strength I'm using. And I'm already at my limit. Achiko explained as Fu kept jumping and swiping at her. Shoji charged at Fu, tackling the boy and then wrapping him up in his arms as they rolled on the ground. In response, spikes grew from Fu's body and stabbed into Shoji. Ack! Shoji cried out in pain as he released his grip on the boy. Shinso threw out his capture tool at Fu, but the boy just ducked out of the way. He's still too fast. Shinso said. If I could wrap him up, then we might be able to win. Achiko looked at Shinso's capture tool and then at Fu, and she got an idea. With enhanced speed, Uraraka charged forward and two of the ends of Shinso's capture tool. She ran at Fu, and Fu lunged at her. Achiko jumped over Fu and wrapped his body up in the tool. Fu tried to use his strength to get it off of him but found that his bindings were surprisingly durable. Achiko ran around Fu, continuing to wrap him up in the capture tool until the boy was completely restrained. Ugh! Rah! Fu tried to use Kyosei's shape-shifting to make a tentacle or something to help him escape, but the moment the tentacle got more than a foot away from his body, it splattered against the ground due to the increased gravity. Jiro quickly ran over and pointed one of her speakers at Fu's face. Give up or so help me I will blast you. Fu stopped moving for a while, and after a few seconds, Kyosei retreated back inside of him. We surrender. So, I think I know where the kid is. Kirishima commented. Niza had actually had Team D wait a bit so they could change the fake city a bit. Firstly, they had shifted it into night mode, covering the city in a dome that gave off some fake moonlight. The only other light sources were the street lights that were littered about the city. However, the most notable change was the enormous castle that took the place of a few buildings. It looked to be made mostly of cement, meaning that cementos was most likely used to make it so quickly. Still, it didn't make it very hard to figure out where the kid they were supposed to find was. Right, they are most likely inside the castle, Tokoyami said. Although given how our other classmates' trials have been, I have little doubt that it's a trap. I'll go ahead. Any surprise attacks I'll have to go through me. Kirishima hardened his arms and brought his fist together. No arguments there. Toru gave him a thumbs up, not that anyone could see it as she was without her gloves. With that decided, Kirishima went out in front, with Tokoyami and Toru following behind and Ojiro guarding the rear. Back in the observation room. So a castle, Zero remarked, a little taken aback that they made a whole freaking castle just for this kid. Yeah, she's a bit overdramatic. Izuka sighed, although there was a hint of a smile on his face. Oh. Is it Kiba? Is it finally time for Kiba? Mina asked very eagerly, representing more than half of my readers. Well, yeah, it's her, Izuka sheepishly admitted. Unlike the others, she was very involved in the process of making this exercise. Of course, we had to refuse a lot of her requests because a lot of them were unrealistic. But the exercise still has a lot of Kiba to it. Yeah, Mina cheered. They're not meeting much resistance. Todoroki pointed out as he watched his 4 classmates travel towards the castle. I expected more of those grim monsters. Maybe they'll be there when they try and enter the castle? Sato theorized. No. Izuka shook his head. Kiba has something different planned. I think it'd be better if you just watched. A few minutes later, with Team D. As Team D reached the entrance of the castle, they found Kiba waiting for them. Standing up on a balcony over the gate. Kiba was wearing a very elegant black dress with long black gloves and black dress shoes, as well as a golden crown with large red rubies, and her hair was styled up in fancy drills. Welcome, heroes, Kiba said in a very smug tone, her face reflecting her confidence as she literally looked down on the students. To your demise. I am Kiba Midoriya, Queen of Eternal Darkness, the rightful ruler of all that lives and breathes, and the one destined to inherit the earth. This got various reactions. Tokoyami went silent as he got bad middle school flashbacks. Wow, this is a lot. Ojiro thought. Is this part of the exercise? What's going on? Kirishima wondered in confusion. Toru on the other hand. Toru squealed. It's Kiba. Ah, I love her. Look at her. Look at how cute she is and her cute little dress. Everyone was taken aback by the invisible girl's sudden outburst. Most of all Kiba, mostly because she didn't know she was there. So this is the streamer you were so excited about. Yeah, that makes sense, Ojiro said, taking a good look at Kiba. This is the exact kind of person the internet would enjoy. Well, she sure is cute, Kirishima admitted. The cutest. Toru gushed. Ahem. Kiba fake coughed into her fist to pull the attention back to her. I see my reputation precedes me. To think even someone in the heroes party would admire me so. Well, we will touch back upon that later. For now, I must test you to see if you are worth my time. Now. Come. Nuklavi. What? Said all 4 of the students at once. Then, from inside the castle, they heard a clopping sound. like a big horse was coming towards them very quickly. What kind of name is Dash? Before Ojiro could finish, he was cut off. Ra, eh, ahi. A blood-curdling, ear-piercing scream ripped through the air, forcing the students to clutch their heads in, coving their ear, hoping to stop the noise from reaching them. Through the gates exited another huge grim. This one being far more horrifying than anything else they'd seen up until this point. Its bottom half was a huge grim horse that looked rather normal for a grim, with the exception of its rib cage poking out of its chest and its red eye glowing slightly brighter and more menacingly than the other grim. The particularly horrifying part was the rider, which was physically attached to the house by its torso. Its body was skinny with its rib cage poking out in the same way as the horse, and jagged spiny bones came out of its spine. Its mouth didn't seem to be able to fully open, as the black parts of its lower mouth seemed to be stuck to the bony white part of its upper mouth, as if its teeth had dug into its gums and were pulling it upwards, as its mouth emitted a strange hellish glow that could also be seen in its eyes. To make it even more demon-like was its mask, featuring 2 long horns at the top of his head and its long disproportionate, skinny arms which went all the way down to the ground, and at the end of them, instead of hands, were 2 things that were somewhere between claws and fingers. In summary, it looked like the horseman of death had come and was physically attached to the horse. The 4 students stood absolutely still, paralyzed in shock and horror. Back in the observation room. What the actual fuck? Kaminari blurted out. A language. Ida managed to pull himself together quick enough to scold his classmate, but his eyes were still glued to the screen. Hey Midori, have you ever considered getting these kids to a therapist? Mina asked Izuku, trying to look away from the screen as much as possible. Constantly, Izuku admitted. I'm honestly kinda ashamed of myself for not having them all on regular appointments. It's just hard to find people you trust with your kids. Don't you have other employees you trust with your kids? Todoroki asked. YUC. Izuku was sweating a bit, looking away from the class as his face turned red. Momo's eyes went wide. Wait a minute, are you saying Dash? That you still haven't hired any other employees? Achiko gave Izuku a stern look, making him sweat even more. Wait, what? Jiro asked. Once again the class was treated to yet another shock when they all suddenly realized that Izuku was taking care of all these terribly dangerous children by himself. Suddenly a few of them, such as Todoroki, Shinso, and Momo, had noticed a few things about Izuku they didn't before, such as the bags around his eyes and his overly tired posture, as if he was running on nothing but coffee and determination. I mean, I've been looking at applicants. Izuku swiftly defended himself. It's just, like I said, it's hard to find people to look after your kids. I've heard horror stories about babysitters or people running orphanages who abused and mistreated the children. And the kids have already been through so much. But if you keep this up, you're gonna work yourself into the ground. Achiko scolded. How much did you even sleep last night? Oh, well, you know, a while, Izuku answered without answering, making Achiko glare harder. Do you have some kind of quirk that helps with exhaustion? Mina asked him. This only made Izuku sweat even harder. See, can we not talk about Dash? Shitty Deku doesn't have a fucking quirk. Oh no, Izuku muttered. Into the observation room walked Katsuki Bakugo. Still in a few casts, as recovery girl was unable to heal all the broken bones Kai had given him. He was exhausted and his body still ached, but that didn't stop him from limping his way here and glaring at Izuku like he took his entire existence as a personal insult. Which he did. Deku's quirkless. Bakugo barked. Which is why he's been hiding from me. For months. Most of the class gave Izuku surprised looks, receiving yet another shock in only a short while. Izuku, however, switched from nervous to exasperated. Kaken. I haven't been hiding from you, I just moved. Where? Bakugo shouted at him. Izuku sighed and shook his head. Kaken. We'll have this conversation later. Like hell, you get to tell me what to do. Bakugo limped towards him, but Achiko stood in his way. Get the fuck out of the way, roundface. Try and make me. Achiko dared him in a deadly serious tone. You won't get far in those casts. You look like you're about to tip over. Grrrr. Bakugo opened his mouth to let out some more curses and threats, but someone far more threatening spoke first. Katsuki Bakugo. Everyone froze when Nizu spoke up. His tone was as calm as ever, but there was an underlying threat lacing his words that sent shivers up Bakugo's spine. Need I remind you that you are on exceedingly thin ice? Acting so impolite to our guest is an offense worthy of detention at least. TCH. Bakugo held back his tongue. He was absolutely pissed, but he knew that saying literally anything right now wouldn't help him. Not with someone like Nizu. And I doubt Recovery Girl cleared you to leave the medical wing either. Meaning that not only did you threaten our guest, you disobeyed one of our staff to do so. Nizu deduced. And what's worse is that the guest you threatened is a high-ranking government associate. And the head of the government kyodon or branch. Wait, what the fuck? Katsuki was taken off guard by that, looking at Izuku with a mix of anger and shock. Deku, what the fuck have you been up to? I will explain later, it's a long story. Izuku sighed. For now you should go back to Recovery Girl's office. I will tell you about it later. I promise. Bakugo wanted to shout at him. Tell him that he can't tell him what to do. But he could feel Nizu's gaze, warning him that if he did anything funny he'd pay for it dearly. Yes, I think that would be for the best. Nizu agreed. And I think it would be best if you did this now. If looks could kill, Izuku would have died a long time ago, but right now he would have been atomized. But that was all he could do. Give Izuku an enraged look and eventually turn away and leave towards Recovery Girl's office. After that, there was a prolonged period of silence as the class took in this new information while Izuku prepared himself for the worst. Quirkless, huh? Man, that sucks. Kaminari said. Izuku was a bit shocked, but even more so when Jiro stabbed him with one of her jacks. What the hell was that for? Kaminari rubbed his arm where Jiro had stabbed him. For being an insensitive idiot. Jiro hissed at him. While I doubt you had any harmful intent, your words could be taken offensively, Kaminari Shoji explained. It could be taken as you looking down on him. What? Oh shit, I'm so sorry, man. Kaminari swiftly apologized. No, it's fine. Izuku reassured him flusteredly. You're right, it does suck. A lot. More than you can imagine, Achiko muttered bitterly. And that explains the trust issues. Shinso now saw Izuku in a whole new light. Quirk discrimination. I thought the whole thing with Bakugo was the reason, but that was just a small part of something a lot worse, wasn't it? Is quirk discrimination really bad around here? Mina asked with a very concerned and worried expression on her face. Wait, does that mean Bakugo is quirkist? Siro asked. I mean, I don't know. Sato asked before looking at Izuku curiously. Is he? If he is, then it's appalling that Yue allowed him in despite this. Todoroki looked at Izuku. How bad did he treat you because you were quirkless? Or was there another reason? Izuku didn't quite know what to say, and he was looking increasingly uncomfortable with all the attention pointed at him. Because of his quirklessness. Fortunately, this was very different from the past. Enough. Ida suddenly shouted, causing almost everyone to jump. That detail was obviously something Midoriya was trying to hide and something that clearly makes him uncomfortable. He's an honored guest at UA and we should desist in asking about such things for the time being. We are mostly a bunch of strangers to him. I really don't know why you'd think he'd want to open up to us. Ajui reminded everyone. Yeah, guys, come on, give him some space. Achiko said, getting between Izuku and everyone else. Thank you. Izuku's face turned red, embarrassed at needing to hide behind his friends from something that ultimately, in his opinion, he should have been able to handle. Right? I guess the last thing I'd want to do is talk about my discrimination issues with a bunch of people I met less than 2 hours ago. Shinso chided himself. The purple-haired teen now had a keen interest in whatever the hell Izuku's story was. Partially out of curiosity and partially because he wanted to know how much he should hate Bakugo. Putting Midoriya's condition? Is it okay to call it that? Momo wasn't really sure how to handle this situation and she was very afraid of being labeled a quirkist or worse, subconsciously being a quirkist. It really doesn't matter, that's one of the nicer things people have called it anyway, Izuku explained. Well, not to sound dismissive, but putting that aside, would you like to explain the part where Nizu said you were in charge of the QR branch? Momo asked. It had taken a while for her to get over that particular fact. It just didn't make any sense to her. Not only should one person not be doing that much work, but he was 15. Since when could 15-year-olds be government agents, let alone run a branch of the government? Yeah, what's that about? Achiko had, in her rage at Bakugo, completely missed that part the first time and was now left wondering what her friend had gotten himself into now. That was not necessarily true. While I do hold influence over the Cure branch and I have power and responsibilities aligned with them, I am not technically in charge. Izuku explained. This was true. While the quirk removal branch would do basically anything he said, considering that he could put an end to the whole branch at any time, that was only in practice, as on paper the government was still fully in charge of that branch. And that branch now had its own leaders and officials. This might be a stupid question, but what's the cure branch? Kaminari asked. I don't know what it is either, Siro admitted. Looking around, it was easy to tell that most of the class seemed to not know what it was either. Really? None of you have heard about it? Momo looked at her entire class in shock. I suppose the news has only started to spread recently, but I had expected at least a few of you to know. It stands for Quirk Removal Branch, Nizu explained. Ahoy! This time the entire class was in shock, and it showed. Wait? Quirk removals? Like getting rid of quirks? Siro's eyes were wide and his jaw was hanging, and this expression was shared by a large chunk of the class. Why yes, Suzuku admitted before quickly explaining himself. The cure branch is focused on removing quirks from level 2 OPCs. And only ones I think should have their quirks removed. But how? Why? What even dash? Momo really couldn't wrap her head around a single teenager being in charge of such an important function that could change so many people's lives. How does one even erase a quirk? Todoroki asked. And what are the criteria for it? Shinso asked. Well, I can't tell you how it happens, but as for the criteria, typically only people with quirks that are too dangerous to be allowed to exist in society. Izuka tried to think of the best example. For example, there was a boy who had a roulette quirk. Every 24 hours his quirk would change from one thing to the next. This caused a lot of different problems as no one could adapt to his quirk since it kept changing. Most of the time this would only lead to minor injuries and small-scale property damage. However, some of his quirks were so dangerous that they would lead to mass death and destruction. And so eventually DC had to take him in and contain him. And since there was nothing they could do to contain his quirk, the only options he had would either be to stay locked up forever or have his quirk be removed. Todoroki summarized. That sucks. Mina cried. Being locked away because you were born with a dangerous quirk. How horrible. Momo said. Izuku. Achiko, unlike the others, was more concerned for her friend. After all, she knew having to decide the fates of people's lives must weigh heavily on him. Unfortunately, there is little choice for anyone in the matter, Niza spoke up. If the people with these quirks were to be released, then they would cause casualties eventually. Whether they wanted to or not. Their quirks are simply too uncontrollable. And so these are the only two real options. It is truly horrible for these people and their families, but there is little choice otherwise. The class went silent, a feeling of frustration brewing inside most of them. Frustration at the misfortune of these innocent people who they could do nothing to help. Of course, removing quirks is only a last resort, Izuku reassured them. DC will try first and foremost to find ways for these children to live with their quirks rather than simply just taking them away. At least they will, so long as I'm deciding who gets their quirks erased. I imagine that the government has been trying to expand the scope of this branch? Nizu asked him. Yeah, but taking away someone's quirk is a serious matter. One that shouldn't be treated as a first or even second option. Izuku explained. It's condemning them to a life of hardships. The class once again went silent as they had to fully take in what Izuku had said. Well, I believe that's enough sidetracking. It looks like the battle with that monster is about to end. Niza said, turning everyone's attention back to the exercise. A few minutes ago with Team D. Rah! The monster, because I'm not gonna write out its name every time, let out another ear-piercing scream as a charge towards them. Ugh! Dark Shadow! Tokoyami covered his ears and called out for Dark Shadow to attack. The sentient quirk, which had been suppressed since the exercise started, burst out of his cloak to confront the charging Grim. Dark Shadow was quite big due to the lack of light, about the size of the creature's torso, and so when the two met, Dark Shadow was able to tackle the monster's chest, but while this did stun the rider a bit, it didn't manage to stop the horse from charging towards them. I got this. Kirishima activated his quirk, hardening his arms and running towards the monster. Kirishima grabbed the horse's legs mid-charge and tried to hold it back, but whenever the horse would pick up its feet it was taking Kirishima with it. Whoa! 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 The horse did stop its charge, but only so that way it could flail around to try and throw Kirishima off its leg. Meanwhile, Dark Shadow was busy attacking the monster's head, clawing at its head and making some scratches in its mask. The Nuclavi grabbed into Dark Shadow's face and then started pushing it away. However, much to everyone's surprise, its arms extended, pushing Dark Shadow a couple dozen feet in the air before rotating its body and swinging Dark Shadow around, and then slammed it into the ground. "Everyone close your eyes?" Toru shouted. Knowing what was coming, everyone closed their eyes. "Say cheese." Toru unleashed a massive flash of light that blinded the horse and the rider. "Rah!" The creature stumbled back, the rider covered its eyes with its hands while the horse just started bucking around while blinded. Ojiro took this time to jump up to the horse's head, using his tail to boost himself up before hitting the head with his tail. This didn't do much damage, but it did further stun the horse, causing it to stumble. "Dark Shadow! Its legs!" Tokoyami commanded. Dark Shadow rose up and charged at its legs, tripping it up and causing the horse to fall. "Now, for its head!" Tokoyami allowed Dark Shadow to grow a bit larger, and the sentient quirk went right towards the rider's head. The monster stretched one of its arms at Dark Shadow to protect itself, but then Ojiro jumped up and smacked the arm away. It was about to use its other arm to try again, but Kirishima held it back. "Not today." Dark Shadow reached its head, opened its massive beak, and bit its head off. At that moment, the creature stopped moving and slumped over. A few seconds later, it started to evaporate, and eventually it turned into nothing but black smoke. Tokoyami watched as the monster disappeared and forced Dark Shadow back to his side, repressing his emotions enough to shrink him. "Yeah. All right." Toru cheered, throwing up her hands in celebration, not that anyone could see it. "I thought that would be a lot harder." "It probably would have been if it wasn't for Dark Shadow," Ojiro pointed out, taking a moment to breathe. "Yeah, that was awesome, man." Kirishima praised his classmate. "You two are manly as hell." A simple matter. You all also performed well," Tokoyami said simply. "Now let us confront the child." "Hey Hagakure, you said you've watched this kid on YouTube, right?" Kirishima asked, looking around since he couldn't see her. "That's right." Toru had a huge smile on her face, not that anyone could see it. "She is so cute the way she acts like a little queen. And when she messes up or makes a mistake, how she stutters and tries to fix it, it's just so cute. "Alright, but what about her quirk?" Ojiro asked. "Oh, it's some kind of enhancement quirk," Toru revealed. "She's super strong and fast and tough. And she keeps calling herself a vampire, so she probably has to drink blood. Maybe it's like Sato's quirk but with blood instead of sugar," Kirishima speculated. "In that case, it would be best if Kirishima once again took the lead," Tokoyami told them. "Sure. More than happy to take a hit for my friends." Kirishima gave him the thumbs up. "'Cause that's how a real man does it." With that decided, they all stomped the castle. When they got inside, they found the castle was rather plain, lacking any color or decorations, which was to be expected given how quickly it was made. It was also very narrow and small. The hallway they were running through didn't lead anywhere but in front of them, and it didn't seem like there were any other rooms either. The truth was the castle was mostly just cement with a hallway and throne room with no other rooms. When they finally reached the throne room, they were greeted with the sight of Kiba sitting on a cement throne. It seemed that while they had been fighting the Grim, Kiba had gone for a change of clothes. Now she was wearing what looked like blood-red armor as well as her usual cloak. She was also holding a wine glass with some blood in it. "Oh my god, look at her little armor," Toru squealed. "Who made that?" Kirishima wondered. "Heroes." Kiba addressed them while not looking away from her wine glass. "I see you have defeated my Nuclavi. There has got to be a better name for that," Ojiro muttered. Kiba stood up off her throne and turned away from them. "Do you truly understand why I must rule this world? Are we supposed to answer that or dash?" Kirishima couldn't get out any more words as an invisible hand covered his mouth. "Shoo! She's gonna start monologuing," Toru whispered. "You privileged few, born with abilities that fit the taste of the public, would never understand the struggles of my brothers and sisters." Kiba continued. Little did they know the reason she had turned away was because she had written a script and was currently reading from it. "When my father found me, I was cast aside, thrown into the gutter by the despicable people that had been given the honor of birthing me. Despite my beauty, despite my grace, despite my power, despite my perfection, in their eyes, my quirk made me nothing but a parasite. A blood-sucking leech is what they called me. Is this real? Is this an act? Well, what is happening?" Ojiro was not prepared for a full monologue when he went to heroics class today. This is going to go on for quite some time, isn't it? Tokoyami cringed. He knew better than anyone that these kinds of speeches were not short, because there was a time when he once gave them. For someone such as myself to be treated like gutter trash proves that this what is wrong. That it is unjust. Kiba's acting was hammy as usual, but it was what one would expect from a child. And her exaggerated hand motions made it all the more entertaining. And so I who am perfect. I whose power sits above all things. I whose gaze looks down upon all. I Kiba shall be the one to correct these imperfections. Back in the observation room. Wow, she is really going on for a while? Kaminari pointed out while Kiba was still talking. She has some impressive grammar for her age. Momo praised the young girl. Well, she did read an entire dictionary, Izuku explained. Why? Kaminari asked, his face showing pure confusion. I haven't read through a dictionary. We could tell, Jiro smirked. How long does she intend to keep talking? Shinso asked. Well, the script she wrote was 20 pages, Sue. This might take a bit. Izuku sighed. She wrote a script? Achiko had an amused smile on her face as she had to try and keep herself from laughing. What am I saying? Of course she had a script. She worked on it for hours. Izuku remembered seeing his daughter furiously writing and editing her work with several dictionaries and thesaurus littered around her. She had worked so hard on it that he didn't have the heart to tell her to make it shorter. Although he did feel bad for having to put everyone through 20 pages of monologuing. At least the invisible girl seemed to be enjoying it, not that he could really tell. She is still going. Todoroki honestly was surprised she hadn't run out of breath. How long has this been going on? Roughly 7 minutes, Nisa said. Well, at least she's giving them time to recover after the fight with that monster, Momo said, trying to look on the positive side. She honestly did find the girl quite cute and she could see where her popularity came from. Heck, she'd probably check out one of her videos after this was all over. I don't get why you guys are complaining. Look at her. Look at that smug little face. Mina giggled. That's gonna stop being cute when she grows up, Shinso said. No, she's still gonna be cute in the future, Mineta said. I can tell. I am going to assume that was a compliment. And nothing else. Izuku said, his tone alerting the boy that this was a warning. Yeah, of course. Mineta was quick to say, sweating a bit. The last person he wanted to piss off was the person in charge of deciding who got their quirks removed. Well, I doubt she could go one for much longer, Shoji said. With Team D, 15 minutes later. And so that is why I ask you. Will you join me? Or be destroyed? Kiba finally finished her monologue and dramatically pointed towards the students. Yes, my queen. Toru replied. No, she won't, Tokoyami said. Kiba looked at the other two only to find that they had fallen asleep. Hey. Huh? Kirishima and Ojiro jolted awake. Did you two fall asleep? Kiba was livid. I spent hours preparing that speech, and you two fell asleep. Sorry? Kirishima quickly apologized. You went on for a while, so. You have 5 seconds to harden yourself before I turn you into a red smear on the walls, floor, and your friends, Kiba said in a dead serious voice as she dramatically threw off her cloak. Hey wait Kirishima didn't get any more words out before Kiba dashed over to him at speeds he couldn't react to and punched in his hardened stomach. Hey. Kirishima was immediately sent flying through the concrete walls, far away from his friends. Everyone took a step back, not expecting such speed and power from someone of her size. Even Toru hadn't expected that. Kiba gave Ojiro a nasty glare. You're next. Oh shit. Ojiro never saw himself being so afraid of a 7-year-old, but after seeing one of his toughest classmates being knocked away like a baseball, he was more than a bit intimidated. Tokoyami unleashed Dark Shadow, who was doubled in size, and let him stand guard in front of Ojiro. Kiba was not deterred in the least, however, and simply ran up to Dark Shadow and uppercut him in the beak, sending him flying through the roof. Tokoyami could feel Dark Shadow's cord tugging at him, and he was almost lifted off the ground because of how high Dark Shadow was sent. I'm sorry, my lady. Please forgive me. Toru unleashed another flash of light. Kahi. Kiba hissed and covered her eyes. The sun. Run. Tokoyami commanded after Dark Shadow returned to him. The three immediately turned tail and ran for the exit while Kiba still recovered from Toru's attack. When they reached the hall, Dark Shadow took a moment to cave in part of the roof, blocking off access to the throne room. That won't hold her long. She's strong. Really strong. Dark Shadow warned them as he caved in more of the roof to try and block Kiba's path. And fast. She was so fast. Toru always wanted to meet Kiba, and when she realized that she was gonna be the one to face her, she was excited. And now she was remembering that Kiba was gonna be the one kicking her ass. So now she was a little less excited, a little more scared out of her mind. They felt the castle shake, and the sound of something being destroyed behind them signified that Kiba had recovered and was breaking through their barriers. And so they ran just a bit faster. When they reached the outside, they found Kirishima, whose lower half was still stuck in the side of the wall. Kirishima. Toru ran over to her classmate, who looked to be in a daze. Huh? Toru? Why are there 5 of you? Kirishima asked deliriously. Dark Shadow pulled Kirishima out of the wall and set him down gently. They could see the imprint of Kiba's fist on his hardened abs as well as various cracks around it. Ojiro wanted to ask if his classmate was all right, but he was a bit distracted by the hole in the wall, showing that Kiba had punched him through many feet of concrete. Ah, man, she punches hard. Kirishima groaned after regaining his senses. Through 'em. Well, unless we want to be punched next, we gotta figure something out. Toru pointed out. Do you think there might be some kind of win conditions like the other ones? Kirishima asked. I don't think so. The win conditions were pretty obvious. I think we just need to subdue her. Ojiro looked at the hole once more, realizing what he just said would entail. So we have to subdue a girl that can punch someone through a dozen feet of concrete and moves faster than we can see while also not attacking her? Toru summarized. No one could see her expression, but they could tell she was probably terrified by the tone of her voice. That seems to be our only option. Tokoyami agreed, a nervous sweat going down his beak. Throom. The rubble over the exit was broken, and out came a very cross Kiba. You know, I had expected many things from the mighty warriors of UA. Running away was not one of them. Kiba growled at them, baring her fangs in a way that would have been cute if she didn't just punch through a concrete barrier. Dark Shadow. Restrain her. Tokoyami let Dark Shadow grow to the biggest size he could get, which still allowed Tokoyami to control him. Dark Shadow charged at Kiba and tried to grab her, but despite being more than quadruple her size, Kiba just backhanded it away. However, Dark Shadow only was knocked a few feet away and quickly shook off the blow before charging at her again. TCH, persistent little shadow. Kiba dashed towards Dark Shadow and proceeded to drop-kick the blackbird. Begone! This time Dark Shadow got sent significantly further, being sent over a dozen feet away before digging his claws into the ground to stop himself. However, with Dark Shadow so far away, Kiba had a free shot at the students. Perhaps if the shadow will not yield, then I should destroy the one who casts it. Kiba glared at Tokoyami with murderous intent. You'll have to get through me first. Kirishima stood in front of Tokoyami and activated his quirk, hardening his chest and arms. Kiba immediately ran over to him, grabbed his leg with both hands, before picking him up and swinging him like a mace, batting Tokoyami away. Hey! Wait a minute. Kirishima struggled, but Kiba had a death grip on his leg, and he couldn't do much without accidentally hitting Kiba, not that it would have helped if he could. Dark Shadow came back and tried to get Kirishima away from her, but she just hit him with Kirishima too, landing repeated hits with her hardening weapon, keeping the shadow at bay. Grr. Harden your head. Kiba ordered her hostage weapon. Kirishima didn't have time to ask questions as Kiba suddenly jumped up, and when she came back down he saw what she was going to do and had no choice but to oblige. Kiba slammed Kirishima's face down on Dark Shadow's head as hard as she could. Dark Shadow was smashed into the ground, its head getting stuck for a moment. Wahi? Kirishima was seeing stars, and he now finally understood what it was like to be Kaminari after using his quirk. Toru. We could use another flash. Ojiro shouted out to his invisible teammate. KK. Sega. Before Toru could attack, Kiba threw Kirishima at her, hitting her in the torso and causing both her and Kirishima to go flying away through a nearby tree and out of sight. I will not allow her vile light to shine once more. Kiba shouted. Meanwhile, Dark Shadow pulled itself out of the ground and came at Kiba from behind, finally grabbing her with both arms and holding her in the air. Cursed Shadow! You will fade into the darkness. Kiba shouted as she struggled to try and get out of Dark Shadow's embrace. Dark Shadow was having a hard time keeping hold of her as she was still stronger than him. He needed more power. And then he had an idea. You know, you remind me a lot of Fumikage when he was little. Dark Shadow told her. Dark shadow. Cease. Tokoyami ordered, a small blush of embarrassment adorning his face. He used to wear a cape and some gold plastic armor. Dark shadow continued. Dark shadow. Tokoyami could feel his embarrassment grow. And he called himself the Black Guardian of the Shadow Plains. Dark shadow was cracking up as he recalled those memories. Ojiro gave his now thoroughly embarrassed classmate a look. Black Guardian of the Shadow Plains, I think just the Black Guardian would have worked. Enough. Tokoyami shouted in pure outrage. Dark shadow could feel it. The pain, the embarrassment, the sheer feeling of regret. All that combined with the stress of the exercise and Tokoyami's already loosening control of him made Dark Shadow get bigger and bigger. And then his eyes turned red. Oh no. Tokoyami realized too late what had happened, and all he could do was look on in horror as his quirk went out of control. Roar. Dark Shadow now towered over everyone with Kiba still in his hands. He raised his arms up and slammed Kiba into the ground. The ground cracked from the impact and Kiba was left flat on her back, staring up at the monster that loomed over her. No. Ojiro and Tokoyami shouted, thinking they had failed the exercise. Kiba pulled herself up, rubbing the dust off her armor. Then she dashed away to avoid a slam from the enraged Dark Shadow. Kiba looked up at the pure black monster in front of her and smirked. Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary. Rah! Dark Shadow unleashed another attack, bringing his claw down on Kiba. In response, when the fist was in range, Kiba unleashed her own attack, punching the claw. When the two attacks collided, it sent waves of wind washing over the surrounding area, which made Ojiro and Tokoyami cover their eyes as the sheer force of it almost knocked them over. Dark Shadow and Kiba struggled in a test of strength. However, Kiba was surprised to find that she was actually being pushed back. She dug her feet into the pavement, however, this did very little to help as she was still getting pushed. Gah! Kiba grit her teeth as she felt the sheer power of Dark Shadow coming down on her arm. The pain coursing through her body grew greater as she grew weaker and weaker. The more she used her strength, the more she used it up. Am I being overpowered? No. I just need more blood. Kiba jumped back, away from Dark Shadow, and quickly set her sights on Ojiro. He'll do. Kiba lunged at Ojiro with her teeth bared and tackled the tailed student to the ground. Ojiro could do nothing but look on in terror as Kiba's fangs came closer to his neck. And then a flash of light washed over everyone. Ka! Kiba hissed as she covered her eyes. Not again. Rah! Dark Shadow also covered itself, moving away from the light and losing a few centimeters of size. While Kiba was stunned, Kirishima ran up and grabbed her with his hardened arm and chest. Are you guys okay? Toru ran up to Ojiro and helped him off the ground. Yeah. But we hit her. Ojiro pointed out. But it doesn't seem like the exercise has ended, Tokoyami noted. Perhaps the order not to harm her was yet another logical ruse. Congratulations, you figured it out. Kiba confirmed before kicking Kirishima in the abs with the back of her foot. Now perish. Ack! Kirishima dropped Kiba as he recoiled in pain. A small crack appeared in his hardening. Rah! Dark Shadow charged at them, coming right at Kiba and Kirishima. Ojiro pushed Kirishima out of the way by hitting him with his tail before moving out of the way himself. Kiba rushed at the oncoming Dark Shadow and jumped up to punch the sentient quirk in the face. Dark Shadow recoiled from the impact of the punch, but quickly shook it off and retaliated with a swipe of his claw. Ah! This time Kiba was the one sent flying back, her body digging into the ground, and the force of the blow pushed her back over a dozen feet. Rah! Meanwhile, in the observation room. I don't understand. Ida shouted out to the principal. They are currently harming the child. The exercise should have ended. Ah, well, you see, it was a logical ruse. Niza cackled when he saw the shocked looks on the students' faces. You should be familiar with them by now. Wait. So we were allowed to harm the children? Momo couldn't believe what she was hearing. Surely such a thing couldn't be allowed at a hero school. You can't be serious. Mina added. Actually, that makes sense, Sachiko said after thinking about it for a moment. Everyone but Nizu and Izuka gave her questioning looks, urging her to explain herself. These kids aren't fragile. It's not like we could do serious damage to them by accident with our quirks. Even Bakugo couldn't do serious damage to Kai by accident. I know. I fought them. Achiko remembered that time she fought Fu, Kiba, Kai, and Sanson all at once. She shuddered at the memory. Never again. At first I thought I'd have to go easy on them, but that didn't end well for me. Let us have this discussion once everyone is present, Nizu instructed them. But rest assured that Mr. Midoriya would not have allowed this if he believed you all could hurt his children any more than they hurt each other on a daily basis. Izuka nodded. These kids all want to become heroes, so they spar with each other on an almost daily basis. There are some times when I have to step in to keep them from doing serious damage to each other. I know what they're capable of and I believe they can handle this, and if not, they can always surrender. On the screen, they watched as Dark Shadow beat Kiba as the vampire girl tried in vain to fight back. After a few minutes, it was clear to see that the fight was over. I think it's time we brought this to a close, Nizu said, looking over his control panel. Back with Team D. Suddenly, the dome that was being used to simulate nighttime started to open up, allowing sunlight to fill the false city. Raha! Dark Shadow stopped beating Kiba into a crater and started roaring out in outrage. As more and more light flooded into the city, Dark Shadow grew smaller and smaller until his red eyes turned yellow and he was back to normal. Is it over? Kirishima asked no one in particular. That is correct, Mr. Kirishima. Team D has succeeded, Nizu said over the loudspeaker. What? Kiba, who was still conscious just a little scuffed up, pulled herself out of the hole Dark Shadow had pounded her in and looked absolutely outraged. I can still fight. Kiba had pulled herself to her feet too fast, and the stinging pain that coursed through her sent her right back down to her knees. Kiba, that's enough, Izuka said over the loudspeaker, his voice firm and leaving no room for argument. Kiba pouted but made no further protest. A few minutes later in the observation room. After a quick trip to Recovery Girl for Kirishima and Toru, everyone was back in the observation room. Now, as you have noticed, the rule in which you were not allowed to harm the children was a lie, Nizu explained with complete nonchalance while sipping his tea. You might be wondering why this is, and why if this is the case, did I lie about it in the first place? Yes. I must admit I am very disappointed with the amount of deceit being done by our educators. Ida huffed. But there is a reason for that lie. An important one. However, first, let me explain why you are allowed to attack the children at all. Nizu said. Firstly, as you've all determined, these children are quite strong. That's a massive understatement. Thought pretty much everyone in the class. To be perfectly honest, harming these children is not something you could easily accomplish, and two of these children most of you have no way of harming at all. Nizu continued. It would take both a conscious effort on your parts and a lot of neglect on our parts for one of these children to get seriously injured. I don't believe even Mr. Bakugo would seriously injure a child, nor does he have the power to do so accidentally. Yeah, but is it really okay to hit kids? Jiro asked sheepishly. A lot of the class still seemed unsure about the prospect of attacking children, which was understandable. Surprisingly enough, it was Izuku that spoke next. While I definitely don't condone attacking children in almost any situation, there are unfortunate situations where that is the best course of action, Izuku said with a heavy heart. I don't like to think about it this way, but let's look at Kai's scenario. In that scenario, a villain forced Kai to go on a rampage. However, that test was simplified for the sake of this exercise. If the villain that controlled Kai was smart, he wouldn't be on top of a roof with the hostage right next to him. In all likelihood, it would take much longer to find them. And in that time, if the heroes didn't take him down, Kai would have destroyed the entire city and killed countless people. The reality of the situation hit the class hard. They had been fighting in a fake city with fake buildings and no other people. If this were real, then there would have been real people on those streets that Kai walked on and in those buildings he crushed. Those would have been real people's homes that got destroyed because of him. And the aftermath wouldn't be much better. Izuku continued. Of course, there are the thousands or tens of thousands of lives he would have either ended or ruined, but even Kai's life would have taken a bad turn. Even if he got his parents back, the guilt he'd feel for what he did would leave mental scars that would last for the rest of his life. And he'd never be able to show his face anywhere again. He'd be treated like a monster by pretty much everyone, even if they knew his family was being taken hostage. His life would have been over before it really began. There was an underlying sadness in Izuku's voice. As if he wasn't just talking about the simulation. As if he had known stories similar to this that wasn't fake. And that made everything he said all the more mortifying. And that leads into why I lied. Nizu jumped back in, although his tone was less cheery than before. Because what I said, don't attack the children, is what you will hear from the people in charge, such as the Hero Public Safety Committee. However, while I do not condone frequently ignoring people with authority or your superiors, most of the people telling you this are not pro-heroes. They're not on the field, and they don't know what it's like to be in your situation, and as such sometimes fulfilling those orders is either impossible or not worth the cost. Is it ideal to not attack children? Yes, absolutely. Is it always possible? Unfortunately, no. And in those situations, you'll have to go against what you've been told. These are the hard decisions one will have to make as a pro-hero. This was the difference between Aizawa and Nizu. Aizawa would crush his students' spirits with harsh words, intimidation tactics, and threatening expulsions. Nizu was far more cruel. He would crush their spirits with the three worst enemies of man: truth, logic, and reality. To say the mood was low would be the understatement of the century. The mood went straight to hell. And it was clear everyone was deep in thought, taking Nizu's words very seriously. I'll have to hurt kids? That's awful. But if I don't, I might just ruin their life. Mina thought about the scenario of having to choose between spraying a child with acid or condemning them for life. It made her stomach turn. Shinso thought about his own life. He had been targeted because people were afraid that he could use his quirk on them. There would be no telling how bad it would have been had he actually done something to someone with it. Let alone if he had done something as terrible as murder. Even if it was an accident or if he was forced, he would never hear the end of it. Achiko felt like she had just increased her own gravity or that she just overused her quirk. Part of her had wondered if one day she would be the one to give Izuku a child, not in that way she swears, but she's always thought it would be like how Izuku did it. Finding children in need and giving them a home. Not beating them to a pulp and delivering their unconscious body to Izuku. And the worst part is that look in his eyes when he explained it to them. That look of resignation and despair. He'd understood this for a while, and unlike her, he would be the one to deal with the aftermaths. After giving them a few minutes to take that in, Nizu decided it was time to move on. And as heroes, even when you have to make these decisions, you can't freeze before or after. Every second can count. Nizu warned them. And as such, let us move on to our last exercise. The last team. Team E consisting of Ida, Kaminari, Mina, and Shiro. We're now in the fake city. Starting the last exercise. None of them were in good spirits, however. Not even Mina. Not because they would be facing another grossly overpowered child, but because of the conversation that had taken place not too long ago. So are we gonna hit the kids? Shiro asked. I mean, we might have to, Kaminari said sheepishly, seeming unsure of himself. Well, I don't want to. Mina objected. Overpowered or not, they're still kids. And all we have to do is show them some affection. We're no strangers to love, so we should show them some too. As much as I would like for that to be the case, I doubt Principal Nizu would allow for this to be so simple. Ida spoke up in a determined yet still somehow unsure voice. You know the rules, and so do I. The principal might have made this test knowing that and planned it out accordingly. So you think we might have to hurt them? Shiro scratches his head. That's messed up. Don't think that I'll give up that easily. I'm never gonna give up. I'm gonna find the kid and hug the crap out of them. Mina said with full determination. And with that Mina ran off to find the kid. Wait. You have to wait for us. You have no idea what's up ahead. Ida ran after her with the rest of the team following. Back in the observation room. The mood was still somewhat downtrodden, however, it seems most of the class had moved on, hoping that if they paid attention to the last exercise it would lift the mood up a bit. I've never seen Mina so down before. Kirishima thought as he remembered how upset she looked. Mina always had this attitude about her. Always this optimistic person that would do her best to make sure she was never gonna let you down. But now she herself seemed down. He wished he could do something about it. He never wanted to see his friend like this, but honestly, he didn't know what to do here. It seems Mrs. Sido is quite determined. How fortunate for her that this mission will not require them to attack the child. Nizu saw his students take a sigh of relief. Because they can't. Wait, what? Toru asked. What do you mean they can't attack them? Oh, I think I know who it is. It's Sanson, isn't it? Azui realized the child's identity, remembering them from the amusement park. Izuka nodded, confirming her suspicions. Achiko shuddered. Oh no. Oh no? Momo repeated in confusion. Is this child somehow more dangerous than the ones we've seen before? Sanson is considered the strongest of all the kids currently under my care, Izuku revealed, causing everyone to suddenly get nervous as they wondered what on earth could be that strong. Her quirk is called Acid Body. Her body is entirely made up out of extremely corrosive acid and she can manipulate it however she pleases. Basically, she's completely immune to most attacks. Your quirk has to have some sort of special effect on her in order to take her down. Achiko explained. Like my gravity manipulation. But I don't think anyone on Team E can do anything to her. Kaminari actually can do something. Electricity can cause Sanson to lose control over her body temporarily, turning her into a motionless pile of acid for about 20 seconds. Izuku remembered the day they found that out. Sanson got a bit too close to an electrical outlet and it did not end well. Wait, so she's just a sentient blob of acid? Momo knew she was just repeating what Izuku had said. But it sounded absurd. Like many other things she heard today. She would be able to beat most people in this class just because of her quirk alone. She's like Mina on Trigger. Mineta shouted. Or a better version of that sludge villain. Toru pointed out. Izuku flinched but didn't say anything. So what are they gonna do? Sato asked. Well, it appears their current plan is to just run around and look for the child. Nisa pointed out. But it appears they won't have to look for much longer. Back with Team E. Team E was still running and both Shiro and Kaminari were falling behind. Mina, you must slow down. It is imperative that you do not desert your allies. Ida shouted at her. Mina stopped for a minute and used this opportunity to catch her breath. Sorry, you guys. I guess I got too ahead of myself. Oh wow, no wonder you guys couldn't keep up. I've never run that hard before. If you don't pace yourself, you gonna tire us all out before we even find the kid. Shiro panted. Sissis. Everyone suddenly froze when they heard what sounded like acid burning through something. Mina, did you make any acid? Kaminari asked, looking around to see where that hissing was coming from. No. You guys would have seen me do it. Mina pointed out, wondering where the sound was coming from herself. Hissis. The four of them looked at a nearby manhole and found that smoke was coming off of it. And then Sanson slowly oozed out of the hole, completely swallowing and destroying the manhole as she made her way onto the street, which also started smoking as she touched it. Is that the kid? Kaminari asked, slightly confused by the sight of the moving pink puddle of acid. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised, Shiro said, resignation dripping from his word. Waraha. Sanson let out some strange noises which only confused the students more. Was that a cry? Are they crying? Mina honestly wished she had more details. I've never heard a cry like that before, Shiro muttered. Rare. Suddenly, in the distance, they saw two Grimm, this time looking like huge gorillas, charging right at them. We're gonna have to fight those things, aren't we? Kaminari asked nervously. It appears so. Ida got into a stance, ready to fight. However, Sanson suddenly moved towards them and went right at Ida. Huh? Ida quickly reacted, using his quirk to help him dodge Sanson's lunge. Scored. Hug. Sanson said, reading the lines she had been giving earlier. Oh. I get it. She wants a hug. Kaminari said, however, his eyes widened in fear when he saw Sanson coming to give him a hug. Hey, wait a minute. Kaminari had to keep backing up as Sanson came closer and closer to him until eventually he just started running from the acid girl. Eventually, Sanson stopped chasing him and started going after Mina. Mina didn't quite know what to say and just opened her arms up for a hug. Sanson didn't waste any time and jumped on Mina, wrapping herself around the older acid girl and restraining her whole body. Hey. I like tight hugs, but I can't move. Mina's whole body was being constricted by the goo girl. It was a good thing she was acid-proof. Unfortunately, it wouldn't hold out forever. Continuous exposure to acid would degrade her skin's resistance to it until she too would burn at Sanson's touch. The three guys couldn't do anything but watch as Mina tried to struggle out of Sanson's grip to no effect. It's not like they could pull her off, she was made of acid. But they had other problems to worry about anyway as the Gorilla Grimm were getting close. Mina, please try and calm them down. We will deal with these Grimm. Ida told her. Hopefully it will assist in calming them. Okay. Mina said she had stopped struggling at this point, seeing as it wasn't helping her in the slightest. With that decided, Ida, Shiro, and Kaminari looked towards the oncoming threats. Kaminari, you said your quirk causes you to fry your brain, correct? Ida asked his classmate. Yeah. Kinda only a one-use thing for now, Kaminari admitted. Then let me and Zero incapacitate these monsters. Ida strategized. Hey now wait a minute Zero wasn't quite on board with fighting two giant hulking beasts with one less teammate after already being one teammate down. But he didn't have time to object as the gorillas were in range and Ida ran at them. Aim for their feet Zero. Ida ran at them as fast as he could while in first gear and charged right at one of the gorillas. One of the gorillas tried to pick Ida up but the armored student ducked under the swipe and went between its legs. The two gorillas had their attention on Ida so they didn't notice Zero shoot out his tape at the left one's legs, tying them together and causing it to fall to the ground. The other one looked at Zero, giving it an enraged roar. However, before it could move to attack, Ida came back and kicked it in the back of the head, causing it to face plant onto the ground. Now, Kaminari, Ida ordered. Right? Zero, give me a boost, Kaminari told his ally. Zero nodded and wrapped Kaminari's midsection in tape before swinging him around and throwing him at the two Grim. Indiscriminate shock. Say goodbye. Kaminari unleashed a massive electric attack at both of the apes, electrocuting them both. Raha! The two beasts screamed at the top of their lungs before they quickly died and their bodies turned into black smoke. Kaminari's face planted onto the ground and Ida came running up to check on him. Kaminari, are you okay? Ida picked up Kaminari and turned him around, only to be met with derp face. We, Kaminari responded. Meanwhile, Mina was still trying to talk Sanson into letting her go. Kid, look. The villains are gone. You can let go now. More Sanson said. It was at that moment that the ground started to rumble. Awulu. Coming just into view, running down the streets, was a horde of Beowulfs. About 70. All running at them. Oh. Shit. Zero looked at the oncoming horde with absolute fear shining in his eyes. Language. Ida shouted at his ally. Really? Now. Zero was honestly shocked that Ida would still be concerned about such things. A hero should never let loose such profanities. Even in the face of danger. Ida rationalized before tucking Kaminari under his arm. Heroes should also know when they are outmatched. Like just now. Grab Mina and run. And with that Ida took off in the opposite direction. Eh? How am I gonna do that? She's covered in acid. Zero shouted at Ida, but he was already too far away. Ah! Damn it. Knowing he couldn't just leave Mina there, Zero shot his tape out at her, covering her in tape before using his other arm to swing away through the air, beginning Mina with him. However, Sanson quickly dissolved the tape, causing Mina to go hurtling to the ground before Zero's tape caught her again. Ah! Could you please? Stop. Dropping me. Mina felt like she was gonna vomit, not only from being swung around on tape but from constantly falling and being lifted up again every time Sanson ate through his tape and he had to catch her again. Sorry. If you can't tell, this is really hard and there's a horde of demons after us. Zero turned back to see the Beowulfs were gaining on them. Mina looked at the oncoming horde of red-eyed death and knew she needed to get the kid off of her. Hey, kid, what's your name? Mina asked as calmly as she could. Sanson. The goo girl said. Oh, that sounds like a great name for a girl? Mina was unsure of the gender of this living blob of acid, but the voice she used sounded feminish. You are a girl, right? Sanson formed a head near Mina's face and nodded. Okay, Sanson, do you like heroes? Mina asked her. Sanson nodded. I want to be a hero. Well, then you need to let me go, Mina told her in a gentle tone before she looked at the horde. I know they're scary, but I can't just lie here and do nothing. A hero has to be brave. Can you do that for me, Sanson? Be a brave little hero? Hero. Sanson repeated. I don't want to hurt anyone. My queer court's everything. I know. Mina smiled at her kindly. Acid can really make a mess sometimes. My quirk makes acid too. But I use my acid to take down bad guys and save people. So acid can be used for good too. And I'll show you how if you let me go. There were a few moments of silence before Mina felt Sanson's acid started to move off of her and the goo girl came off her and fell to the ground below with the Beowulfs coming at her. Wait, I didn't mean like that. Mina shouted. The Beowulfs quickly descended upon Sanson with 3 of them lunging at her with their claws extended out. Only for them to be grabbed out of the air by Sanson's newly formed tentacles and shoved into her acid body where they struggled a bit before dissolving away. Sanson expanded herself, getting bigger and bigger until she was the size of a bus and faced off against the army of Beowulfs. They never stood a chance. Zero stopped swinging and brought the both of them to the ground where they just sat and watched in shock as Sanson tore through the demon-like wolves, swallowing them in her acid, slamming them around with dozens of her tentacles, forming weapons out of her body, and using them to crush and slice the Beowulfs by the dozens. Oh wow, she's really killing those things. Zero could only watch in awe as the massacre unfolded in front of him. Ida ran up to them with Kaminari still in his arms. What is with the class president watched as Sanson beheaded 6 Beowulfs with an acid axe at the same time as she impaled 12 Beowulfs with her acid tentacles at the same time she dragged some Beowulfs into her body, while also forming a massive acid mouth to swallow 5 more Beowulf. By now Sanson just looked like a massive acid monster that was brutally killing everything in her path. Should we stop her? This would be vigilantism, wouldn't it? Ida sounded more hesitant than he should have. Stop her? Dude, she's almost done. Zero informed him. I think all we could do is just watch the slaughter. Back in the observation room. You were not wrong. She is quite terrifying. Momo admitted with wide, frightened eyes as she and the class witnessed Sanson's slimy slaughter. Did you really fight her, Uraraka? Azui couldn't imagine trying to fight Sanson. To think this is the same kid that was turned into soup at that teacup ride. Yeah, it wasn't fun. Uraraka gave a nervous laugh. Even with my new quirk upgrade, I couldn't beat her if she was in full acid mode. This is the reason we decided that fighting Sanson should not be part of the exercise. Nisa sipped his tea. Of course I did not intend for this to happen either. Sanson is going off script. I apologize, Sanson must have not liked the fact that she was the only one to not have any action. She's very fond of fighting, you see, and not very fond of staying still. Izuka sighed. Although I can't really blame her. Well, it looks like that was the last of the Grim, Nisa commented. The exercise is over, so let's call them back. A few minutes later, after everyone was called back, Nisa spoke up. That exercise did not go as intended, but I think you understood the point of it. Sometimes children will look to you for comfort, sometimes in a physical way, such as attempting to hug you. This, however, may impede your ability to perform your job as a hero, or it will just kill you. There are unfortunate cases of children attempting to hug people only for their quirks to end up killing the person they were attempting to hug. Izuka remembered Eri's story and felt a pang of sadness run through him. So while you may want to comfort a child in distress, it would be best to employ caution if you can, Nisa told them. Mina pouted but stayed silent out of fear of provoking Nizu. So using your words to calm a distressed child is a valuable skill, one that may end up saving your life, Nisa told them. Of course, afterward the correct response would not be to let them take down the villain themselves, but given the swiftness in which she dispatched her foes, I will look the other way on that this once. And with that, congratulations. You have all passed. Very well done. These exercises were hard, however, the real-life situations will be so much harder. So keep your wits about you. Now, time for lunch. The bell rang and the students were dismissed. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share the video, and support the original writer. See you in the next video.